It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
11 p.m. on a Saturday night. You know what that means here on WFUV 90.7 FM. It's time for One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I am one of your hosts, Andrew Posadas, alongside me, Chris Hennessy, taking you on a voyage for the next 3 hours through everything in the sports world. Chris, my friend, it's been a while, but glad to be with you hosting once again.
Oh, of course, Andrew. It's been too long, but it's an exciting time to not only be doing this, but being a sports fan. We got NBA trade deadline to talk about. We got 2 regular seasons coming to a close here, and we got an MLB season starting up, and lots of NFL draft stuff too, which we weren't necessarily expecting until a few hours ago, really.
Oh, some big news concerning the draft. Some teams making moves, moving up. Some teams deciding to move back. Kayla Wentzel will have that in our first headline segment a little bit later in the hour. We'll also go into the Giants and the Jets. And with the moves that the Giants have made, Chris, a lot of people think they're right there at the top of the NFC East. And I mean, that might not say much considering the dumpster fire that was last season, but no doubt about it. They've been able to restock. They've gone into free agency, and it really seems like they enter, as long as Daniel Jones can cut the turnovers and this team can continue growing, especially on the defensive side, they should be the favorite to win that division.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a big test for Daniel Jones. We talked about it, last year with Sam Darnold. They're going into the third year with, well, for Sam, it was a new offense, or no, it was the same offensive system for the second straight year. That's true for Daniel Jones as well. It's a gut check time, and then in a year from now, are we going to be talking about Daniel Jones the same way we're talking about Darnold now, where everybody pretty much admits that the Jets are going to draft a quarterback at this point or trade for Deshaun Watson. So yeah, it's a big season for Daniel Jones because this might be it. This might be his last chance now that he has Kenny Golladay and a healthy Saquon Barkley to put up 8 or 9 wins and see him in the playoffs.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the Giants and see how they stack up alongside the likes of Washington and Dallas in the fight for the NFC East this season. We'll also touch on the Jets and how these recent draft trades between the Dolphins, the Niners, and the Eagles, how that affects them, Chris. With Sam Darnold, I mean, nobody knows what his future was, but leading into yesterday, it was up in the air. But now with this recent trade, we'll get more into it, but it really feels like the writing's on the wall and it's all but a formality that the Jets are going to go quarterback at number 2.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it actually makes their pick more valuable if they're looking to trade it, because now you have an almost guarantee that the top 4 picks are going to be quarterbacks. So if you want one, you can't trade with Atlanta, and San Francisco is certainly not going to trade with you, and Jacksonville is certainly not going to trade with you. So the Jets are really the only team that you're looking at if you want Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, if you are Atlanta or you are Detroit or maybe Philadelphia, to get up into that second spot. So maybe they recoup a lot of first-round picks and are able to move back, or Carolina, as I should add as well. But it seems more likely that certainly they'll draft Zach Wilson, who had a great pro day, and time to start all over again 3 years later and just hope that another guy is the right answer. Andrew, it's a dark reality.
Momentarily, I will play the role of Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting. You will be Matt Damon, and I will be the one telling you at the end, it's not your fault. It's not your fault, Chris. We'll talk about that. The Jets, Giants, get into all that NFL stuff. And in our midnight hour, you mentioned it just a bit ago, Chris, the NBA trade deadline has come and gone. We saw what the Knicks and the Nets did and did not do, yet I mean, I think there's still optimism. The Nets really, they could have stood pat, and they did, and it made sense because they're already loaded. They have a bunch of weapons. And for the Knicks, I know a lot of people, a lot of fans were clamoring, can we make a big splash, get that big trade? But I think all in all, for both of these teams, they didn't have to do much at the trade deadline. And I think they're still in position, especially the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, they're vying for a championship, but for the Knicks, I mean, still in position to at least make the play-in tournament and let the chips fall where they may.
Well, certainly for Brooklyn, right? I mean, they where are they going to add a piece? And the team is stacked 1-12. But for New York, I think what you have to be concerned about is how much better both Chicago and Miami got. And they're teams that are kind of vying in that 500 area for the 4, 5, 6 spots. And if you're not in one of those, then you're in the play-in round. And that could obviously be tough. So I think the inactivity will prove that, maybe Chicago and Miami get better than them down the stretch here, but doesn't mean that they're going to miss the playoffs. I think a trade would have made this season a lot more interesting, but it would have mortgaged the future, which you don't want to do at this stage of a rebuild.
Yeah, we'll go in depth with the Knicks, the Nets, and other teams that made moves, see where they will go moving forward in the second half of the NBA season. We'll also have host from Sports Illustrated. We're here from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. on Saturday nights. Robin Lundberg, he is a radio host on CBS Sports Radio, Saturday mornings, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Robin will join Chris and I and talk more about the Knicks Nets and their moves, and also have a conversation on Coach of the Year, Chris, because I think that there's a lot of candidates in the NBA, and I mentioned it with Robin when we talk about Quinn Snyder and Monty Williams out in the Western Conference, but I think Steve Nash and Tom Thibodeau both have strong cases, and we'll get Robin's opinion on who has the stronger case, but two guys who I think are firmly in the mix for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, especially Tibbs. I mean, you look at a team who had literally negative expectations to be 500 and be considering getting a star at the deadline. Even that is just a remarkable feat for this team that every year before this was lucky to win 15 games.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of people want to go to, all right, who has the best record? All right, that coach should be Coach of the Year. But when you think about what the Knicks were last year and what they are this year, and the resiliency and just the grittiness, just the infusion of culture and identity, especially on the defensive end from Coach Tibbs, it's really paid dividends. And this is a team that's right there. I mean, with the Eastern Conference being what it is, jumbled from 4 to 10 and teams at 500, under 500, it really feels like the Knicks, barring a collapse down the stretch, they're going to be in that play-in tournament. And I think Knicks fans will be happy just with that. They thought this team was only going to win 20 games. So anything more than that, which they already have, I think it's a win-win for all parties involved. Moving forward, though, our final hour, we're going to get in, and Chris, you said this best. We got sports coming in, one of those sports. This is the final Saturday night that we won't have baseball on. We'll be back on the diamond. The weather's getting nicer. It's going to be beautiful times. Yankees, Mets. But Chris, we have to play devil's advocate. We'll talk about the biggest questions surrounding both teams because I think for their respective expectations, there's still a lot of quote unquote problems or issues that both teams face that may prove to play a factor down the stretch if they aren't as successful as Yankee fans and Mets fans thinks they'll be respectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you have to answer those questions because this is World Series or bust for the Yankees and the first season with expectations in a long time for the Mets. So the Yankees did not perform well in the playoffs last year. They didn't really add anybody of terrible consequence. So to me, it's a concern for the Yankees, but we'll get more into that, later in the night. But there's reason to be concerned with both teams and a couple of players I think we're going to highlight specifically too.
Yeah, Kayla will join us for that segment and just break down both the Yankees and Mets and what we expect and what we think may be potential problems that they might face throughout the season when it begins next week. And we'll end the night with some, we got to, because it makes sense. And I don't want to sing the song because I got a call from Jim Nantz and CBS and they were like, Andrew, we heard you on 90.7 a week or two ago and you're singing the song. We don't want to sue you now, so just don't do it again. And I just told Jim, hello, friends, hello, Jim. And I just said that I wouldn't do it anymore. And he hung up the phone accordingly. So on that note, we will talk about all the Sunday Sweet 16 matchups. And Chris, this is interesting to me because I can kind of go behind the curtains now. Here at FUV, some of us current staff members, as well as some former FUV sports alumni, we are in a bracket pool on ESPN, and there's a friendly wager between all of us. But Chris, at this point, my bracket is in intensive care. I've lost 3 of 4 Final Four teams.
You're champion alive. Don't give me intensive care.
Intensive care because my points are just, you're sitting pretty with like 1,200 max points remaining. I'm barely hanging on. I got like 1050. I'm hoping Gonzaga can take me there. But Chris, with all the upsets in the first round, this is to me what's so fun about it. When you get into bracket pools like this, just go back and forth, rooting for teams you wouldn't find yourself rooting for, and then just seeing teams like Ohio State and Texas just burn down parts of your bracket. I'm happy to be where I'm at right now at the top, but I feel like it's going to be a very, very long, hard fall for me in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, personally, I picked Michigan because I was a Big Ten believer, and that hasn't gone so well so far. Thankfully, they're the only Big Ten team left, but I did lose Iowa because of my I guess you could call it Big Ten bias. I have no reason to be biased towards them, but I am the only one with the Wolverines. So the hope is, if they win, Andrew's going down. So that's all I could hope for.
Yeah, I picked Gonzaga, and that might be the smartest choice I did for my entire bracket. Everything else is up for debate right now. But Chris, Kayla, and I, we will talk about the matchups. Oregon, USC, Creighton, Gonzaga, go Zags. For the love of God, please go Zags. Florida State, Michigan. Let's hope the Wolverines maybe get a dose of their own medicine just for Chris Hennessy's sake. And of course, UCLA, Alabama. A lot to get into here over the next 3 hours. And Chris, I think the best place to start is on the gridiron and just talking Giants and Jets, because right now, both teams are in position where they both can be competitive. There's just certain things they need to shore up respectively. And I think for the Jets' sake, I think you think there's more than what the Giants need to do. But either way, I think some big questions for both teams still left to be answered. And we're going to get into that in the next few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think April 29th is going to be a big day in Jet history, whether it goes poorly or fantastically for the Jets, because either they're going to stick with Sam Darnold, they're going to draft Zach Wilson, they're going to trade for Deshaun Watson between now and then. And that's a big choice because you have a quarterback in Darnold who you did believe in. You traded up 3 spots to get him, and now he's not going to be here anymore. That's looking more like the reality every single day. So it's going to be an interesting one for Joe Douglas and the squad over there.
Chris and I will elaborate more on the Giants and Jets. Where are the Giants now in the thick of things in the NFC East? And for the Jets, a long time still until April 29th, but seemingly more of a certainty than not that the Jets may go quarterback. We'll get into that. So for the next 3 hours or so, now the next 2 hours and 47 minutes, strap on the proverbial seatbelt, kick back, relax with us as we take you up until 2 a.m. Sunday. But on the other side of this break, some NFL talk, Giants, Jets, we'll break it down coming back here on 1-on-1.
One on One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Just getting started here on New York's longest running sports call-in show, One on One. Andrew Posadas, Chris Hennessy here with you, leading you up to 2 a.m. And the first topic we should get to, and I think it's hard for me because truthfully, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, so I'm not privy to talking well about the New York Football Giants. But Chris, you got to give credit where credit is due. The Giants needed to address some things going into free agency. You go ahead, get yourself a number one wide receiver in Kenny Golladay. They didn't let him out of their sights after he left Chicago. A lot of people thought he was going to sign with the Bears, goes to the Giants, has that meeting. They don't let him out of their sight. He signs with them. They also get a Dory Jackson. You re-sign Leonard Williams, Nate Solder, and then you take chances on a Kyle Rudolph and a John Ross. I mean, there are a lot of weapons for Daniel Jones to play with now, and I think they weren't able to get Leonard Floyd. I think that's the one thing. They didn't get another edge pass rusher. I'm sure they would have wanted to continue shoring up the defensive line and giving that defense more firepower. But for the most part, Chris, I got to say, with these moves, the New York Giants, at this point, if you're asking me to pick a team to win the NFC East right now, I had to put money on the line, I'd have to go with the Giants, just considering they've been able to retool, especially on offense. That was the one thing. And I think it helps with guys like Slayton and Shepard. They can now be more complementary pieces. They don't have to be the number one wide receiver, those guys on the outside that have to make plays consistently. I have to think that right now the Giants are at the forefront in terms of being the team picked to win the NFC East.
Yeah, I would agree. I think what's remarkable from Dave Gettleman is not only did he shore up a lot of needs, but he did so with barely any cap room.
Yeah.
And it was pretty remarkable. Obviously, they had to let go of Kevin Zeitler to do so, but they're able to restructure Nate Solder's contract and figure it out from there. But in terms of the NFC East, yeah, I would still pick. It hurts me to believe in the Cowboys, but I think I might still pick the Cowboys because they do have the best quarterback. But they do have the worst coach of the three options too. So, we'll see how that one plays out. But obviously they were doing very well before the Dak injury, and they even did okay with Andy Dalton in there. Not fantastic, obviously. And now they pay Dak the big bucks. So they're probably expecting to be, honestly, the favorites in this division after what they just paid Dak Prescott. But back to the Giants, yeah, I think that Kenny Golladay and Kyle Rudolph are really great for that offense because it gives you two veteran presence pieces who can still catch the ball. Kyle Rudolph, obviously, on the very tail end of his career now, will be more of a locker room guy, but still a guy who can make a catch and be a red zone threat. Kenny Golladay is a great receiver. He really is. And I've seen a lot of Plexico and Eli comparisons, and I'm not a Giants fan, but you have to hope that this is anywhere near Plexico and Eli because that ended in a game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. So it was a good offseason. I think that the defense still has some question marks, but to me, the biggest question mark still is the draft because we've seen Dave Gettleman have good off seasons in terms of free agency and draft really poorly. So we'll see who they get at 12. I believe it is. No, 11.
11. The Eagles are now at 12.
12 is in my head for the trades. 11. We'll see when they get to the 11. I would say either an edge rusher or an offensive lineman would be the two biggest needs right now. But this is the guy who drafted running back at 2, so we'll see.
Yeah, here's my thing with the other two teams in contention in the NFC East. I'm not even going to say the Philadelphia Eagles because we all know they are in the midst of a tank job, and it better work because if it doesn't, we're going to riot. But I digress. Just moving on to Washington and Dallas. Dallas, yes. If you look on paper, that offense is loaded, and with Dak Prescott under center, they should be the favorites. But that defense, to me, they were awful last year. They didn't do much to shore it up in free agency. A lot of people think they're going to draft Patrick Surtain out of Alabama for the secondary, but still, I don't see that defense being nearly as good or catching up to the production that their offense will give them. And for Washington, I think inversely, you can say the same thing. I mean, their defense is really, really good, but offensively, are you really going to bank on Ryan Fitzpatrick to take you to the playoffs, to take you to the promised land? And if not him, Taylor Heineke, who my dad still, he called him Heineken for the whole entire time he saw that game against the Bucks. My dad loves Heineken, his favorite beer. And now Taylor Heineke, one of his favorite players. But is my dad going to put his hopes and dreams in him? I think not. So for the Giants, that defense, it's already built in place. I mean, obviously they wanted to add more to it, but it showed last year in stretches that they got stronger as the season progressed. And I think for me, Chris, the biggest question or the pressure is now on Daniel Jones. You have pieces to work with this season. This offense should be in the top half as far as efficiency, production in the red zone. If Saquon is back at 100 and now you add Kenny Golladay, it's going to make life even that much easier for guys like Evan Ingram and Sterling Shepard to get theirs as well. I just have to think if Daniel Jones is still turning the ball over, making mistakes, and this offense is sluggish and struggling throughout, and this team finishes below 500, and let's say the division is bad again where they finish below 500 and they're still a game or two out from winning the division, I have to think if Daniel Jones can't get it done with this unit this year and he looks like he's regressed at any point, I have to think then that he's on the clock and Gettleman's on the clock as far as where they're going to go with their quarterback position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because the Giants have a better offense than Washington on paper, but a worse offense than Dallas. They have a better defense than Dallas and a worse defense than Washington. So where does kind of that middle ground put them in relation to the other two teams on a whole? They have a great coach. I think that is something we saw last year, and that's going to help them a lot in this race. I think that this draft is huge for all three of these teams because there's clear needs on all of them. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick really could use another weapon down in Washington. They're 19th or 20th.
Yeah.
You mentioned the needs on all defensive positions, front seven, back seven, however you want to break it up. They need a player at all 11 positions and on defense in Dallas. And they could certainly pick one up there. All three of them draft in the top 20. So I think this is going to be a very interesting draft for these three teams. But as for Daniel Jones, you're 100% right because I just mentioned in the open, we're dealing with the same thing with Sam Darnold right now. Going into the third year, there were expectations, not this high, not win the division high because the team was still terrible and the coach was still an abomination and whatever. But expectations to be better than he was the first 2 years. And Sam Darnold was not as better than he was the first 2 years last year. He got hurt again. And now he's probably halfway out the door, despite being drafted third overall 3 years ago. Are you going to see the same thing with Daniel Jones now? It's good. It's possible. My question is an 8-8 division championship enough for Dave Gettleman or his replacement if he ends up getting fired or retiring or whatever it is? Is an 8-8 division championship against a bad Cowboys team and a not so great WFT, and they just kind of like work their way to 8-8 with a couple out of division wins and then get shelled by whoever it is, whether it's Seattle or Green Bay in the first round. Is that enough to believe in Daniel Jones? Are you going to go to the playoffs? Now you're drafting 18th, 19th, 20th overall. You don't have the option now to draft a quarterback at number 2. So is that then good enough to believe in Daniel Jones, pick up the 5th-year option, and then pay him $30 million in 2 years? I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough, man, because for the Giants, I mean, 8-8, that's going to win you the NFC East. It looks like we're not sure how many leaps and bounds the division is going to take if the winner is going to be 12-4, 13-3. Don't know if that's the case. Very well could be. You never know with how a team starts and finishes throughout a season. But for the Giants, I mean, you drafted up to get Daniel Jones. You made this decision if you're Gettleman. This was not something, nobody put a gun to your head and said, you have to draft this guy here. You made the conscious decision to go up. You believed in Daniel Jones. You took a shot on him. So if it doesn't work now with the pieces that you've put in place for him, if the fumbles are still there, if he still looks shaky in the pocket and unsure of himself, if he's still a bit wild with his accuracy, then I mean, for Gettleman, he's got to be gone. You can't stick around when you make that decision and it still hasn't worked out. Because Chris, this is a good team. The Giants are not a bad team. This is a team that could easily be 10-6 if the defense, if as you mentioned, if they're able to add pieces in the draft and this defense continues to take steps in the right direction and the offense catches up. This is a team that could get double-digit wins, but it's all going to fall on the arm of Daniel Jones. If he is not the guy that Dave Gettleman thought he was, then come next offseason, both him and Daniel Jones will be out the door.
Absolutely. And I think something to watch for next offseason as well is the fifth-year option on Saquon. That has to be decided, I believe, by the end of this year, at the end of this season, if they're going to pick up the fifth-year option or not. I don't know. He's been hurt. So if he puts together an okay season, are you going to pick up a fifth-year option on him? Because somebody's going to pay him if he goes to free agency. No doubt about that. Somebody's going to pay that guy. I don't know. That's going to be an interesting one too. And I think that they're close enough to figuring it out and being a 10-win team that it's not worth blowing up. So I think you have to give him the fifth-year option, even though he hasn't proven over a long term right now that he's the gold jacket guy Dave Gettleman drafted him to be. And look, we can hate on the second overall pick as much as we want. Sam Darnold stinks, so I can't sit here and say, oh, the Saquon was the worst pick ever, because Sam Darnold's atrocious. So I don't know. There's a lot of questions around the Giants.
A lot of questions there when you talk about Daniel Jones's future, and when we look at the other New York team, that being the New York Jets, someone who looks like they may really just be out the door. It's only a matter of time. Is Sam Darnold. And after the huge trades that happened Friday between the Niners, between the Dolphins, between the Eagles, Kayla will get into that in our first headline segment a little bit later on in the bottom half of the hour. But those moves, I think, are really indicative of what the New York Jets, maybe what their plans are with that number 2 overall pick. From what we know, the Niners tried to trade up to 2. But 3 was the highest they could get, which lets you know the New York Jets were not trying to part ways, or whatever the Niners were offering was just simply not enough. So at that position, and after what we saw from Zach Wilson in his pro day, and some of the throws and people gagaing and dribbling and drooling on social media over what they were seeing from Zach Wilson, it feels almost inevitable, to use a word that the great Thanos once used in the Marvel universe. It feels inevitable that Sam Darnold is gone, Chris, and your new quarterback will be Zach Wilson. If that is the case, how are you feeling about that imminent future?
I'll say to you what I said to a couple of my high school buddies when Sam Darnold got drafted. One's a Browns fan, one's a Texans fan, So Baker gets drafted and he's all excited, and then Sam gets drafted and everybody just looked at me and I was like, he hasn't played yet. I don't know. Go win an AFC Championship game, and that's how I'm gonna know if you're a good court. I don't know. I can't get excited about these anymore. I can't do it. It's not worth my time. It's year after year of just getting your heart destroyed, and it's like, why am I going to get excited about a 22-year-old kid who can swivel his hips and rip it 60 yards? Yeah, that's great. Sam Darnold can do that too. And to me, like, a pro day, I think is personally overrated, because every NFL quarterback in the world can throw on a pair of gym shorts and rip a ball around the dome. Every single one can do it. To me, yeah, some of those throws are great. I'm not going to deny that. I certainly can't do it, but I don't know. It doesn't get me as excited. I would love Deshaun Watson to be the quarterback of this team. Look, what's happening with Deshaun Watson in Houston is obviously concerning. If any of it's true, I don't want him to be the quarterback of the team. Yeah. but before that, and hopefully, everything comes back and he's innocent. After that, I would love Deshaun Watson to be the quarterback of this team. All of that outstanding. He's not going to be, because Miami now has more draft picks, and now there's these civil cases that will make him basically untradeable by Houston until those settle out. Because that's a known. And that is, I know that Deshaun Watson can get the ball to Corey Davis, can get the ball to Denzel Mims, and can make a bad offensive line look good, because he did that for a long time in Houston. I don't know if Zach Wilson can do that. So to me, I don't know. It's going to be interesting, because I think now, you mentioned they probably called the Jets first, because then you have your choice of Fields, Wilson, or Lance.
Yeah.
At 2, when you wouldn't have that choice at 3, because the Jets are probably going to draft a quarterback. To me, this now makes I said this earlier, the Jets pick, it already was probably the most valuable pick in the draft, because the one was not going to go. It now makes it the most valuable pick in the draft times 2, because you have, all right, number 1 is going to be Trevor Lawrence. Number 2 is going to be a quarterback, whether it's the Jets or somebody else, Carolina, Atlanta, Detroit. Number 3, going to be a quarterback, probably going to be Trey Lance. Number 4 might be a quarterback with Atlanta. Number 7, going to be a quarterback with Detroit. So if one of those teams, Detroit specifically, now sees a Carolina, number 8, sees a quarterback wanting team jump above them, are they going to now offer you more to get into the 2 spot? I don't know. I mean, Detroit's paying Jared Goff a lot of money, but if they're willing to give up 2 of their first-round picks they just got from LA to get to the 2 spot, I think I have to say yes. I think I would say yes to that. Draft Devonta Smith at 7 and an offensive lineman at 23, and walk into next year with 4 first-round picks.
Yeah, it's so hard for me. This conversation just becomes so convoluted, because there are people around the sports world, Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, guys who do this for a living, who still are in on Sam Darnold. They believe he can be a really good quarterback and fringing on a great quarterback if he's in the right situation. So, and you mentioned that number 2 pick being as valuable. I just don't think they're going to trade it anymore. If they wanted to trade it, they would have given it to the Niners. I really think that at this point, they want their quarterback. They want to bring in somebody, or Joe Douglas wants to bring in his guy. And it seems like Zach Wilson is that guy. But you're right. It's hard for me to goo goo gaga over a guy throwing in shorts and a cutoff t-shirt. I mean, it is what it is. And Zach Wilson, the competition he faced, when you think about it, when you compare it to the likes of what Mac Jones saw or Justin Fields, it's not even close, the competition really at the end of the day. I mean, you might call Coastal Carolina, they were a great story in college football, but that's certainly not the type of competition that Justin Fields and Mac Jones and Trevor Lawrence were seeing on a weekly basis. So it's hard to discern what you're going to get exactly from Zach Wilson, but I can't blame the Jets for doing this. I mean, this is it. You got to find your guy. If Sam Darnold isn't that, then you can't waste your time, going back and forth. And for Sam, it's not fair. I mean, you're kind of holding him hostage. He's watching these moves, seeing what you're doing, but he knows in the back of his head, these moves aren't for me. I'm going to be one of these moves eventually. So I think for Sam, he desperately needs just a fresh start. Where that is, could it be Chicago? I mean, Andy Dalton's there, but I mean, that's
my question though. Where's he going to go? Right, Washington fits. San Francisco has now Trey Lance or Justin Fields or Zach Wilson. Chicago has Andy Dalton. Ben went back to Pittsburgh. Philly has Jalen Hurts and Joe Flacco. New Orleans signed both Jameis and Taysom Hill. So all the ones that we laid out, they could trade him there for a second-round pick. They could trade him there for 2/3. They can trade him there. They all figured it out outside of Sam Darnold.
No, I would even say Houston, whatever happens with Deshaun Watson, if they need a quarterback and Deshaun Watson ends up getting suspended for the season, maybe Houston decides to give the Jets a ring and say, you know what, we need insurance policy. Yeah, that's also true. So it depends. I mean, the places for a starting quarterback right now, the spots are very scarce. I mean, if he goes anywhere, he might have to kind of be the backup, or, at this point, maybe it's better off that he waits. I mean, the Jets may trade him, they may not. But for Sam, I mean, I'd have to think in his heart, he'd want one more year with the Jets, at least one more year with some pieces, with things shored up around him to kind of show everyone else, hey, if this isn't going to be my long-term spot, let me show everyone what exactly I'm worth on the market going into next offseason. So this could be a crucial year for Sam Darnold to kind of show everyone, hey, there's still upside, there's still potential with me, but I need to show it because obviously the situation I've been in the last couple of years has been, for lack of a better word, god awful. And it's just stained really the thoughts and what people think his ceiling might be in this league.
Yeah. And I think now he has a real coach. He has the best receiver the Jets have had since Eric Decker's late career brigade to Florham Park and Corey Davis.
Yeah.
Because, since the Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker 1,000-yard season in 2015, there's been no receiver to speak of on this team, and it's been probably the worst position on the team for the last 5 or 6 years. Now they have Corey Davis, who, he was a top 5 pick. Maybe he hasn't lived up to that, but a solid receiver, no doubt. I think that with Sam Darnold on this team and a couple of good picks offensive line-wise, and maybe if they're able to trade down and get Devonta Smith, that this offense can really put something together. And I don't love the Shanahan offense, but that's what it is. It's a Shanahan offense. Just sounds very culty to me. I don't know. But that's what it is in this new offense with a real coach. So I think there's a chance that he could be pretty good next year. And that this could become the right situation. It's easy to give up on Sam now. But the fact that it's not Trevor Lawrence makes it a little bit harder, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, once you use the word cult with Kyle Shanahan, I'm thinking of Kyle Shanahan and all his former offensive coordinators, and they're all hooded up and they have their playbooks out and they're almost kind of saying mantras to just kind of get the vibes offensively. But let's leave it at XY dig. And it's just a whole mantra thing for an hour that Kyle and his former offensive constituents do. We'll leave it there, though. A little over a month away, April 29th, the NFL draft. Both the Giants and the Jets, different questions leading into the draft, but questions nevertheless for them as they look to kind of take steps going in the right direction and to be perennial contenders in their respective conferences going into next season. However, we'll stay with some NFL talk, but this time we'll bring in Kayla Wentzel. She'll give us our first headline segments of the program. Stick around in a few minutes. Kayla Wentzel, NFL headlines, New York's longest running sports call-in show. This is One on One.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to One on One. I'm Kayla Wentzel, pleased to join Andrew Posadas and Chris Hennessy today. And so, guys, you had kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. I want to dive into it a little bit more. The NFL draft. I mean, there was a flurry of activity the other day. I think within like 25 minutes, the whole top 12 picks, lots of trades going on. So the 49ers acquire the number 3 pick from the Dolphins in exchange for the number 12 pick. And then the Dolphins turn right around and they give the number 12 pick to the Eagles in exchange for the number 6 pick. So I know, Andrew, Bird Gang fans here, you and I, part of the same team. What do you think? Who was the biggest winner out of all of this?
Well, I can tell you the biggest loser is, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles and what they're thinking. I'm not sure. We're going to allow Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle to just go. We're just going to miss out on what we've missed out on. DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson. Just add to the list. I'm not sure what the Eagles are doing, but I think the biggest winners at this point are the Dolphins. I mean, I think a lot of people knew that they were going to trade that pick. I mean, they didn't need to be there. They've shown they've indicated that they're all in on Tua. They want him to be the quarterback under center. And this is a team that's on the up and up. And with Coach Brian Flores, I mean, this is a team with potential to really be a factor, not only in the AFC East, but in the AFC moving forward with this young team. So I have to think for them, they're continuing to build and they're going to continue adding pieces through the draft. And now they keep, they go from 3 and go to 6. So they still have a top 10 pick and the trades might not be done. If there's a quarterback at 6, and the Dolphins are sitting there, they can see more offers coming in from a team that wants to move up. So I think for the Dolphins, it's definitely advantageous. But Chris, I would also say this for the 49ers' sake. I mean, they say they're in on Jimmy Garoppolo, but then you move up, they're going to take a quarterback. They're not going to take the best positional player available. I'm not sure what the Niners are doing. I'm not sure what messages Kyle Shanahan is sending to Jimmy G, but I mean, if you're Jimmy Garoppolo, are you really sure heading into this year that this job is yours moving forward if you want it?
Yeah, you don't trade into the top 5 for an offensive tackle or a wide receiver. I think that's a very fair argument. First, I just want to get this out of the way, and I don't want to bring up the Jets again because it just makes me sad. But there's a little thing on y'all's right ring finger there that that if I ever get that, I whatever. Anyways, y'all know what I mean. But the Eagles, are certainly the biggest loser. Even though they pick up a first-round pick, they drop 6 spots and completely out of their biggest position of need. Unless they're going to go and trade for a guy who's on the trading block. They didn't sign Kenny Galladay. He went to the Giants. They didn't get Allen Robinson or Chris Godwin because they got franchise tag. So it was pretty easy that they were going to draft either Waddle, Smith, or Chase at 6 because all of them should have been available, maybe except for one of them if Cincinnati decided to go that route after losing A.J. Green, but they don't. And they trade out of it. They're all going to be gone by that point. Maybe they're not. I don't know. But I feel like they're all going to be gone because the Giants aren't going to draft one now. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. But for the Eagles, if they're able to get one of them, though, I think that they can be considered a winner because they pick up a first-round pick next year. So I think the Eagles, it completely just depends on what they get. If they're able to get Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, or Devonta Smith at 12, then they are a winner because they picked up a first-round pick. But Miami is the winner right now. They moved down 3 spots. They pick up a first-round pick. They have 4 picks in the top 50. Yeah. They already had 4 picks in the top 50 this year, but they continue to have 4 picks in the top 50 this year, a first-round pick next year, and 2 first-round picks the next year after that. They're in position to be right up there with Buffalo for the top of the AFC East in just a couple of years. So it was a lot of interesting movement. And yeah, I agree with you guys that the Eagles trade was controversial, but if they're able to get their guy, then it wasn't so bad.
I know. I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate. Not that I actually feel this way, but I feel like it's good for a point of conversation of that. I mean, what if the Eagles are doing this for like the flexibility of their future? You know what I mean? Like they didn't get anything this year, but Posadas, you had kind of mentioned earlier that they were planning, this year's kind of going to be a wash for us anyways. We knew that that was going to happen. So why not maybe work with the Dolphins and try to get more picks for next year, for the year after? And especially like with Carson Wentz's conditional first round picks, depending on how he performs for the Colts, I think that the Eagles are, and perhaps they didn't do this the right way, but they're kind of trying to set themselves up. So this way, I think that while this year, maybe they're not going to get what they need, they're hoping that next year that they could actually perform, which I'm not sure is a great mindset, but I feel like that is what they're going for, is that this year won't be good. Let's work to build for the future and get more first round picks later.
No, I would say the saving grace is that potentially going into next year's draft, the Eagles could have 3 first round picks. And I think they've kind of built themselves a safety net out of Jalen Hurts. If Jalen Hurts next season, if he doesn't show them enough or he's regressing, if he is not the guy for them, then with those 3 first round picks, you can either, if this team is going to be as bad as we think they are, they're going to have a top 3 pick. They can select a quarterback, or, and I'd say this, with those 3 first round picks, depending on where they drop, I mean, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, if those guys are still out there and they're unhappy and they still convey that message that they want out of their respective situations, Chris, I mean, the Eagles are right there. They'd have arguably the best haul for either the Seahawks or the Texans if they wanted to part ways with their quarterback. And if the Eagles get Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson come next year, they're automatically back in business. That's all it takes. It's a quarterback-driven league. All you need is the right guy under center, and you can find yourself from a top 10 pick in the NFL draft to getting and clinching a playoff berth. So I think for the Eagles, they do have a backup plan if it's not Jalen Hurts. But still, I mean, currently, if you're a prisoner of the moment, and I certainly am guilty of that, I've been in the current, what is it? It's just, I don't know what the facility's called. It's for weirdos like me. But I'm certainly a prisoner of the moment. And I'd have to say right now at this moment, it looks bleak, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's just Eagles fans, considering where we were in 2017, Chris, we were not thinking we'd go into another tunnel. We thought there was light for the next 5 to 6 years. And all of a sudden it's just kind of collapsed on us. And I just don't know what's happened, but you're right. We got a Super Bowl. I should be happy about that, but you know what? I'm not.
That's fair. That's fair. My only disagreement with you there is the Deshaun Watson point. Yeah, if they have 3 first-round picks, which I do believe they will, because I believe Carson Wentz will be good with Frank Reich again.
Yeah.
So they have the 3 first-round picks. Their offensive line is not that good. Assuming they don't get Devonta Smith, they're not going to have any good receivers for the 87,000th year in a row. And their defense really isn't that great either. So I think you can use those 3 first-round picks to booster yourself. And yes, this is coming from a person who wants Deshaun Watson to be a New York Jet and would trade all 4 first-round picks for the next 2 years right now. If that happened, again, legal status outstanding. But I don't know. I think that you have a guy who's shown you a little bit of hope in Jalen Hurts. And if you were able to you have 3 first-round picks and a third-year quarterback who maybe at that point has shown you through a whole season of work could put together a 7-9 season with a pretty bad team. I think that is an ideal situation to be in, to draft a wide receiver, an offensive tackle, and an edge rusher, and all of a sudden be the favorites of the NFC East again. So I think depending on what happens, if Jalen Hurts completely stinks and they go 2-14 and you want to trade it for Deshaun Watson, then I think you could have a conversation. But I don't know. I think he could be pretty good. I think he can get you to 6-10. And you draft a wide receiver next year with the 10th overall pick, and 2 guys later in the draft with the Colts pick and the Miami pick, who could help bring that team back to NFC East title aspirations.
Yeah, I don't dislike Jalen Hurts. I think that he certainly has potential. I think that he showed himself really well this last season. I think that he performed as best he could under our circumstances, under our current wide receiver situation. But like you said, that's not really changing next year, probably. It seems unlikely that we are going to have much of a different offense or even much of a different defense next year. And so I think that it's definitely a huge question mark as to if Jalen Hurts will actually be able to, get a 7 and 9. I'm not sure about that. But it kind of brings me to my bigger point about quarterbacks right now in the NFL, in the NFL draft. I feel like this has been a year specifically that's very quarterback driven. A lot of quarterback questions here. Lots of quarterbacks coming up in this draft, which we had said that we don't really see happening in 2022. We're not really sure that there's going to be that many. And then specifically kind of talking about Jimmy Garoppolo, what are your guys' opinions on that? I know that we talked about it a little bit earlier, but they get the number 3 pick. And like we had said, all of those should go to quarterbacks. Those top 4 picks are probably going to be for a quarterback. And so what are the 49ers planning to do now? What do you guys think? Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah. With Jimmy Garoppolo, it's interesting because I feel like the Niners are kind of taking the approach that the Kansas City Chiefs had when they drafted Patrick Mahomes and they still had Alex Smith. And they felt like, all right, we have Alex Smith for now, but he's kind of a bridge until we feel Mahomes is ready. And then it obviously worked out for the Chiefs. But I can't think for me, I think at that point in Alex Smith's career, Jimmy Garoppolo is not at that point. He's not in the back 9 of his career. That's not the case for him. He was just in a Super Bowl not too long ago. And I have to think that for him, it's got to be nerve-wracking knowing that not only you're coming in as a starting quarterback, but you have a rookie quarterback breathing on your neck right now. And at any point in time, they are going to make the decision to go with him, and you will end up either being the backup quarterback or you'll have to find a job elsewhere. So I think it puts very much a superfluous amount of pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo, because now, I mean, how can he come into this season, ultra confident or just at least 100% sure that the job is his no matter what happens? It's got to be like walking on eggshells. If he starts making mistakes, if injuries play a part on the defense or on the offense, and they get out to a 1-4 start, something like that, Jimmy Garoppolo is going to take the brunt of the criticism for that. And I have to think for him, it's got to be an uneasy feeling going into this draft, knowing that at that number 3 overall pick, you're going to watch your team draft your replacement.
Yeah. And I think it's funny how history would change if he got a little more air under the ball to Emmanuel Sanders.
Yep.
There's a ball that almost gets into Emmanuel Sanders' hands that would have won them the Super Bowl. And maybe we're not talking about this at all, but we are, and that's because he was not very good last year. And I think it's very different, than the Packers drafting Jordan Love or the Chiefs drafting Patrick Mahomes. Thank you. Because those are later in the draft. I think when you look at the Chiefs, they're like, oh my God, this guy's still available. Like, let's go. Let's do it right now. This guy's a superstar. They saw it. Nobody else really did. They were able to get him. Packers, it was later in the draft. Yes, they had a million other needs. We can talk about that draft pick till the cows come home. And how right now it doesn't look so good. But obviously they did the same thing with Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre, and that worked out for them. So who knows? But they had a lot of other needs and they didn't fill them. And they got Jordan Love, but Aaron Rodgers had the best season of his career. I don't think that that's going to happen with Jimmy Garoppolo, because you're looking at a team who is actively searching for your replacement. When the Packers turned to draft, they're like, oh, on our big board, Jordan Love's the best player available. Our quarterback is 36, 37 years old, and we haven't gotten to a Super Bowl in 10 years. We're going to pick a quarterback because we don't know what's going to happen. He had an MVP season. They still didn't get to the Super Bowl, but they had an MVP season. With San Francisco, we were just in the Super Bowl, but he wasn't that good in the Super Bowl or in the playoffs. It was mostly our running game. And they had a terrible season. Granted, injuries were a bear to that team. My goodness, especially those 2 games in the row at Meadowlands. And now they're actively searching for that guy. They are trading up. If they drafted Trey Lance at 12, it's a completely different story. And I know it's a little bit silly, but it's a completely different story to me. If they draft Trey Lance at 3 as opposed to 12. So I don't know. I think that Jimmy Garoppolo has one foot out the door. How could you not? And the team that drafted him has a need at quarterback, even though they just signed Cam Newton. to me, they still have a need at quarterback, and I don't think that Bill Belichick actually believes in Cam Newton. So that's the easy speculation, but it's the speculation I'll make because when Bill Belichick drafts a guy, that's how you know he has a lot of faith in that guy, and that's not always right. The wide receiver they drafted, his name is escaping me, first round, and they just let him go. I don't know. He stunk. Anyway, I don't remember what his name was. He was terrible, but it doesn't always work out. But he clearly had a lot of faith in Jimmy Garoppolo, and he could certainly trade for him this offseason or next offseason. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I think that this is the overarching theme of this year is that organizations don't really seem to have that many great relationships with their quarterbacks. I feel like Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Jimmy Garoppolo, all of these guys are a part of a team that they don't really feel like they're kind of a part of. And so I feel like for Jimmy Garoppolo, he's 29. He's not that old. It's not like he's, like you said, it's not like he's 37 on his way out. He still has lots to go. And so to see your team pick somebody who is coming for your job, I think that puts enormous pressure on him. And I don't know that he'll be able to perform under that pressure. I mean, he wasn't incredible to begin with. But I think that it kind of speaks to like, if your organization and your team doesn't feel like they have that much confidence in you and it doesn't feel like that they are really going to be there to support you, like Russell Wilson had spoke out about, like Deshaun Watson had spoke out about, it makes for a very uncomfortable quarterback situation, which I think in turn trickles down and kind of messes up your entire organization, your entire frontline locker room talk. I think that all of it is going to be really affected by having that guy in the center who maybe feels like he isn't wanted there and he feels like he is people are trying to kick him out. I think that that's going to affect his psyche, and I think that that's going to in turn affect the way that he plays and the entire 49ers team as a whole and as a result of it.
N'Keal Harry, by the way.
N'Keal Harry, yeah. Arizona State, I believe. Not mistaken. But I will say this, though. We talk about those who are being negatively effective. How about Bill Belichick? He's probably sitting in his lair right now in the basement. His dog is sitting in a chair in front of a laptop watching probably doggy videos, maybe Cesar Millan, something like that, while Bill Belichick is just sitting back, doing the whole little who's the evil guy from The Simpsons? I just can't think of him off the top of my head. Mr. Burns. Yes, he's like, excellent. That's Bill Belichick right now. He is hoping. What did San Francisco give the Patriots for Jimmy G? I believe it was a second round pick, if I'm not mistaken. Could the Patriots say, hey, you gave us a second round pick, we'll give you a second round pick right back, call it even Stevens, you give us Jimmy G back? Because I don't think Cam Newton is the long-term solution. So if you're Bill Belichick, you're kind of sitting back and you want this to devolve into chaos. You want the Niners and Jimmy G to not part ways amicably, so you can come in and say, we'll take him off your hands for a conditional 4th round pick. Don't worry about it. We got your back. So I think if you're Bill Belichick, you're kind of sitting pretty from now until the draft. And even after the draft, no matter what happens, I think when the Niners are fielding calls for Jimmy Garoppolo, the Patriots will be right there on line one. And I think they'll ultimately be the ones that snag Jimmy G out of San Francisco.
Yeah, I agree with you. Honestly, because there's not that many other places to go. I just made that point with Sam Darnold. There's not
that's the thing.
Places to go that aren't going to draft a quarterback right now. So that is not good for the AFC East fan in me. Miami now becomes the front runner for Deshaun Watson with all the first round picks they recoup. Jimmy Garoppolo might be going to New England. Obviously, Tua was great last year. Miami, or the whole team was great. Miami last year, and then my lovely Jets.
The lovely Jets, always lovely. Don't we love them? No, I don't think that. Yeah, I think that the Patriots are definitely in on this conversation, and Bill Belichick is watching in glee, and he's very excited. And I think that he's kind of really dominated this offseason. The Patriots have sort of really come out on this offseason and coming out with trades and everything like that. So I feel like Bill Belichick he's running the show a little bit here, and he's very happy about it.
I think you look at his guy winning a Super Bowl, and he's like, he didn't like that very much.
He did not like that. I really think it kicked him into high gear.
Now that's why you spend hundreds of millions of dollars to kind of come back at it. And Tampa Bay isn't going anywhere. So if you're Tom Brady, you're like, hey, spend as much money as you want, bring in whoever you want. We kept everyone on our side. And man, if we could get a New England Tampa Bay Super Bowl, obviously that's not what I'm rooting for, but the storylines, the subplots, the soap opera-ness that would be in effect there between Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, that would be absolutely stupendous. Kayla, let's leave it there. You will be back in our midnight hour talking more headlines. We'll get into something that happened in the NHL with one of their referees, and also some startling numbers concerning the budgets between both the men's and women's basketball tournaments. But next, 1 hour down, 2 hours left to go as we transition from Saturday to Sunday. On the other side of this break, NBA trade deadline has come and gone. We will break it down. Stick around. This is One on One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
60 minutes in the books here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. No worries, still 2 hours left to go in the program. No need to feel like you're getting out of this vehicle. Chris and I still have a lot more to talk about. And Chris, let's transition over from the gridiron to the hardwood because, of course, big news in the NBA. The trade deadline came, it went, and some big moves that we saw just looking around the league. The Orlando Magic, how about the fire sale they had? Nikola Vucevic, he goes to Chicago. Aaron Gordon, he gets traded to Denver. Some other big trades. Norman Powell goes from Toronto to Portland. We also get Rajon Rondo. He gets traded for Lou Williams going over to the Clippers. Lou Williams coming back to Atlanta. I'm sure Lou will be happy about that because he'll have as many lemon pepper wings as he wants to eat over there in Magic City. Won't be too far of a trip from the arena there in ATL. But Chris, I think more importantly, if we can stay local here, the Knicks and the Nets, and I want to focus on the Knicks first because they didn't make a huge move. I mean, they traded away Austin Rivers, but he wasn't a factor in the rotation anyway. And they really stood pat. And I think to me, that was the best thing they could have done. A lot of people were saying, are they going to trade for Victor Oladipo? Oladipo ends up going to the Miami Heat. But if you're the New York Knicks, and we'll talk about this with Robin Lundberg, you are playing with house money. Nobody thought you'd be in this position right now up to this point as we speak on March 28th, when you're sitting right now at 5th place and you are just a half game out from the 4th spot. You're a half game out from potentially hosting a first round playoff series. So I have to think with what you have now, you kind of have to see this through, Chris. You have to see what you have, go into the playoffs, go into a potential series, see what this team can do. And then from there, you can address any further needs in the offseason. And I think instead of trading for anybody, I think now with what the Knicks are doing, they are now more of a free agent destination where guys are going to want to go to New York. They're going to want to go there, and you're not going to have to mortgage some of your future to bring in a potential superstar down the line.
That's the idea, right? I mean, I was on an episode just before the season where we talked about, why the Knicks get no free agents. And my point was, well, they're terrible and they can't develop a young player. Now they have 2 guys in Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett who they drafted who look like stars. You have Julius Randle, who's a bona fide all-star. Robin mentions that. And to play with those guys would be a treat for maybe a Kyle Lowry, who's going to be a free agent at the end of the season, and some others. To me, I appreciate that the Knicks didn't succumb to the peer pressure, because you mentioned what Miami did, you mentioned what Chicago did, you mentioned what Atlanta did. You also have to mention that Evan Fournier went to Boston
yeah.
for 2nd-round picks. Those are all teams that are below New York in the standings right now. The teams above them, the 3 they're not going to catch, Philadelphia, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee. Charlotte lost the Ball brother, LaMelo Ball, to the injury.
Fractured his wrist.
Yeah, that's the only team that's above them. That's the team that's a half a game above them. And that 10 spot, which is the last spot in the tournament, is 12 games out of first place, and the Knicks are not. So it's a 3.5 game bubble from Charlotte at 4 to Chicago at 10. There is no guarantee that this team makes the playoffs, but I don't think that it's necessary. And if all those teams jump them, so what? Then you're in the lottery. Maybe you get Cade Cunningham. Who knows? Anything can happen. I don't think that the playoffs is like the ultimate make or break for the Knicks this year. If they make it, great. If they host a playoff series, that'd be awesome. And if they don't, then they don't. I think house money is exactly the right term, because I'm not a Knick fan, so I'm sure the Knick fan is desperately wanting a playoff series for the first time, and who knows? I can't even remember how long it's been. So maybe it was since Amari broke his hand on the fire extinguisher. But I think it'd be great. But if they fall out because Miami and Boston and Chicago and maybe Atlanta all got better, so what? I don't really see the big deal in that, because you've seen such good progression from guys you needed to see it from, Julius Randle and RJ Barrett specifically.
No, and I would say this, when you look at the Eastern Conference standings and Charlotte at 4, they're only at the 4th spot. They're 2 games over 500. If you look at the West, the Lakers are 4th. They're 12 games over 500. So when you think of those final 4 or 5 spots there in the East, all of those teams are either going to be a game or 2 over 500, at 500, or below that. So I have to think the Knicks, with what they have now, they are going to be between, whether it's between 5 or 10, they're going to find themselves in the play-in tournament, worst case scenario. And then from there, Knicks fans are just going to, let the chips fall what they may, and just, take it and be happy that they're seeing a competitive product night in and night out. But I will say this, because I think it bears a reminder. There were people who, after RJ Barrett got drafted with that top 3 pick, that said, oh, this guy, he had a slow start. People were saying, he's a bust. He's not going to work out. The guy's 19 years old. He gets carded everywhere he goes, for God's sakes. Give him some time. And now with that experience, with a year under his belt, he has really become a guy who, sooner or later, he's going to average 25-5 in this league easily. And he's going to be one of the better two-way wings when his defense continues to come around. And that's what Coach Tibbs has done. He's making guys better two-way players. And Julius Randle, how about from what we saw last season? And I think a lot of people would characterize his play as selfish. And that's understandable, considering they had nobody really there to help him. He really had to do everything himself. You're seeing the selfless play. He's leading the team in assists. This is a guy who's really turning it on. And he's going to be in the conversation for most improved player, although I feel like this is something we expected from him coming out as a top 10 pick in the NBA draft. But all things considered, if you're a Knicks fan and you are not happy right now, or you think you deserve more, then Chris, I would say talk to Jets fans, talk to other fans of other fan bases who would love to be seen or to have this sort of optimism, to just feel like things are going in the right direction. And for the Knicks, you make the playoffs. I think that sets the tone for the next couple of years. And you got to shout out Worldwide Wes and Leon Rose. They have done a phenomenal job of rebuilding this franchise. And I think the optimism has to be through the roof right now if you are a fan of the New York Knicks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, all this fan base wanted was the team to be alive. They were just been dead for so long. And I think losing the Zion lottery at the time was awful. And even not even getting the second pick to get Morant.
Exactly.
It's brutal. But now RJ Barrett's a really good player. Morant's been hurt. And Zion's still fantastic. But RJ Barrett's been a really good player. And it looks like that third spot was not that much of a loss altogether. Because if you have Zion on this team, it completely changes the way the team plays. Not necessarily negatively. But, we have no idea how that works out. So I think all in all, it's been really positive. And I think it doesn't all go down to Coach Tibbs, but I think a lot of it does. I think it's a great hire all in all. And the main concern that a lot of people had with the hire was his unwillingness to play young players. And we've seen that a little bit with Quickly not getting into the starting lineup. But, overall, Quickly's been fantastic. And he's played a lot. And he's played a lot in big games. He's played a lot down the stretch. He's been really fantastic. And Julius Randle is in some way kind of a young player. He's only 26, I think he is. So
yeah,
he is in himself kind of in a way a young player. Trading for Derrick Rose ended up working out really well for this team because they have nobody to trust at point guard. We saw this when he was out with COVID. They have nobody to trust at point guard outside of Derrick Rose. And Derrick Rose is not MVP Derrick Rose anymore. We've known that since his last stint with the Knicks, where he was Kyrie Irving before it was cool. But I think that was a great trade to – I think at point guard on this team you can warrant playing a veteran, right? At shooting guard, it's like, why is so-and-so in there instead of Emmanuel Quickly? Well, Frank Ntilikina, they have essentially given up on. Now Albert Payton stinks. So to me, Derrick Rose is the perfect guy to kind of facilitate this offense, get them to, it's 72 games, so get them to about, I don't know, for 30-something wins, 35 wins. That'd be nice, 36. Put them in a 6-7 seed. Honestly, I think Knicks Nets first round 2-7 would be dynamite. I mean, the Knicks would have to progress through the play-in in the right order to get there. They would take a couple extra hurdles than it would in a normal year. Maybe we should hope it's 3-6 then. The Nets fall off, Milwaukee goes up, the Knicks get to 6. I think whatever it takes, Brooklyn, New York in the first round would be awesome.
No, and we're not going to get full capacity, but I can only imagine if Madison Square Garden was packed to the rafters for a Nets-Knicks. I mean, Game 3 in MSG. Oh God, that would be lovely. But I'd also say this when talking about the Knicks particularly. I think when it comes down to it, for Coach Tibbs, I mean, this team is just different. I've had the pleasure of going to cover games for FUV, and you can just see the personality. I think the resiliency, the gumption that this team has, it's prevalent. Last year, there were so many times where this team goes down double digits and they're folding. That's it. All right, it's okay. We'll get them next time. We'll close up shop. That's it. That isn't the case. They go down by as many as 17 to the Wizards. And I understand the Wizards are nothing at this point. They are minuscule. They'll still beat any college basketball team that you put them up against. So for all the haters on Twitter, you can stop with those type of mentions. But still, down by 17, especially after you just played that team Tuesday. So you've seen them. If you were to split that, you'd probably be fine. But still, they come back in the second half. And they just show that, you know what, we're tough, we're gritty, we're not going to give up. There's no quit in this team. They come back, they win. And you're right about the starting point guard position. It is a revolving door. And Emmanuel Quickly, while that seems to be his job in the future, he still has to learn how to be more of a facilitator, a playmaker. We know what he can do scoring the ball, but there's still development for him. He's still a young guy. And CBS Sports Network will never forget it, a D+ grade for that pick at 25. Good God, that is a freezing cold take if I've ever seen one in my life. But Nick, I would say this, the Knicks are just, It's going to be interesting because I think they're going to make the playoff, Chris. They're going to make the play-in at least. And I think they're going to be the 7th, 8th seed. And from there, you're just going to be happy to see them for whatever it is, 4, 5, 6 games. If they get swept, gentlemen's sweep, or they push a team to 6, 7 games, whatever you get, it's house money. You should be happy regardless. But I do want to transition because now that the trade deadline is over, now it opens the door for potential buyouts. And we've already seen there are some big names out there, Andre Drummond being the biggest. He's going to take pitches from the Lakers, from the Nets. The Knicks are also in it, the Boston Celtics. LaMarcus Aldridge was bought out with the Spurs. It looks like by all indications he will sign with the Miami Heat. Maybe some other players out there, Hassan Whiteside, who might end up getting bought out. But Chris, when you think about Andre Drummond and his impact potentially, if he goes to the Lakers, or even if he decides to be a mercenary and go with the Nets, I mean, Andre Drummond really is somebody who can shift the balance of power. And I think more so for the Lakers because the Lakers need a rim protector. They don't want to have AD and depend on AD to play the 5 at all times. If the Lakers can get Andre Drummond with a healthy LeBron James and a healthy Anthony Davis, now you are really cooking with gas. And I think the Lakers will take that rim protection from Andre Drummond, what he gives on the interior against the Nets and all that firepower that they have.
Well, especially with Anthony Davis coming off the injury, maybe you want to lessen his minutes a little bit coming out of the gate. Maybe you want to play him at the 4 to kind of take off some of the defensive responsibilities, the word I'm looking for, in the paint. And Andre Drummond can help you do that. Also, temporarily, it helps you just kind of right the ship a little bit. And they're 12 games over there in the 4 seed. They'll be fine. But right the ship a little bit. And win a couple of games with just Andre Drummond and Kyle Kuzma out there for LA until LeBron and AD come back. We'll see. I think it's pretty much a done deal at this point that he's going to go to LA. It just makes the most sense for both sides. I wouldn't have hated if the Knicks traded for him, honestly, but probably better that they keep as many second-round picks as possible and don't give up anybody that you don't want to give up for a guy who probably isn't going to – he's not going to win. Nobody in this trade deadline was going to win the Knicks an NBA championship. So at the end of the day, wherever they go, it's not going to be too upsetting, I think.
Yeah, and I think if you get Andre Drummond now, in the buyout market, then you didn't have to give up anything for him to begin with. So I think the Knicks – they had the right idea, when it comes to Drummond and Victor Oladipo, those guys are rentals at the end of the day. They're going to be free agents this upcoming summer. So it's not a guarantee that if you trade off some valuable pieces for them, that they are going to necessarily stay long-term and you're going to secure their services. But I would also say I want to give a quick shout out to this team. And I think our producer, Alex Walls, will enjoy this. Even though they've lost 6 straight, the Miami Heat getting themselves Victor Oladipo, if they get LaMarcus Aldridge, that's a team that now that they're back together and Jimmy Butler and Goran Dragic, they've gone through some injuries and been nicked up a bit. But I think the Heat at 8, that is a scary team. If that team stays down there and they're in the play-in tournament, there's nobody that's going to want to see this team. And I think it's a long way between now and mid-May when the regular season ends. And Chris, we saw this in the bubble. Miami just kind of took off, used that momentum, and they rode it to the NBA Finals. And this is something now with the LaMarcus Aldridge who can stretch the floor. He makes it easier for someone like Bam Adebayo to operate. And then Victor Oladipo, another wing, athletic, a two-way kind of guard, someone to pair alongside Jimmy. I think Pat Riley's at it again, and Eric Spoelstra just has a little bit of everything now. He has size, he has offensive firepower, he has defense. And this is a Miami Heat team that I think, again, they can be scary. I think everyone believes it's the Brooklyn Nets versus the rest of the conference. But I think you can never count out Miami from what we saw from them in the bubble last season and not what they've done. And you adding 2 former All-Stars in Oladipo and Aldridge, I think Miami can be a team. Them, Boston, those are teams down there that if you're a 1, 2, or a 3 seed, that is not the first-round matchup that you want whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though Tyler Hero has been really poor this year, I think they're now kind of replacing that offensive output with Victor Oladipo, which will help them get back on the right track here and kind of get out of that play-in part of the bracket for the rest of the season. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We saw what they can do when they're healthy and hot, which they have not been all season long. So if now getting Oladipo and Aldridge in gets them healthier, it starts to heat them up a little bit. We can see this team go on a run here that puts them into the 4-5-6 range in the playoffs. I find it hard to believe that the top three are going to fall out of that position, right? Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Milwaukee. They might change the 1, 2, 3 order, but those will be the top three teams coming in, even if Miami and Boston get hot. But Miami and Boston can certainly put themselves out of this play-in spot of the part of the tournament and get themselves, through to the first round. And that will help. That will help, no doubt.
Yeah, if Brooklyn can just stay intact, if everyone is healthy, you got to think they're going to roll through the East. But if they do have any chinks in their armor, if there's any sort of deficiency, if somebody goes down with injury, I mean, you're talking about teams like Milwaukee, like Boston, like Miami, who have enough. They have the pieces to make a run. It's just that huge obstacle in their way in the form of the Brooklyn Nets. And just to wrap a bow on this trade deadline talk, Chris, I want to get your thoughts on biggest winner, biggest loser. Let's start with your biggest winner. Who do you think is the biggest winner after this trade deadline?
Biggest winner is either Kyle Lowry or the Miami Heat. I think Kyle, or maybe the Raptors fan or the Miami Heat. On the court, Miami got better. They haven't signed LaMarcus Aldridge yet, but it looks like they're going to. Got better at two positions they needed to get better at, and didn't give up too much to do it as they look to get back to the NBA Finals. Kyle Lowry, I saw a lot of people on Twitter. I follow a lot of hockey people, which means I follow a lot of Raptors fans. I'm like low-key on Raptors Twitter, which is kind of weird. But I saw a lot of Raptors fans saying that he might be the greatest Raptor ever in the history of the organization. So, and that's a fan base that loves Kyle Lowry and what he's brought to that team for a long time. And I don't think Kyle Lowry really wanted to leave either. If you listen to those post-game comments, the game right before the deadline, it really didn't sound like he wanted to leave. And even though the team isn't that good, maybe this will energize them to get a little bounce back and get into the play-in. So we'll see. But I think the Raptor fan who loves Kyle Lowry will get to see him for another, probably 20 games, 30 games-ish. And maybe he'll leave at the end of the season. But it's the rest of the season at least.
Yeah, my biggest winner, I mean, yeah, I'd say Miami is right there, especially if they get LaMarcus Aldridge. I think you swap Oladipo and LaMarcus Aldridge for Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley. You add Nemanja Bjelica, who I can say that can pronounce that name all day long because it's just what I do these days. I'm just great at pronunciation. But yeah, I think with those additions, Miami is right there. They're going to be in the mix. And I'd also say Denver. You add JaVale McGee, there's your rim protector. You go ahead and you add Aaron Gordon, who's somebody who can play the 3 or the 4. He can play small ball. He could be at the 5 if you need to be. He's grown into a better defender. And offensively, his game is there. He can step out and shoot the ball. And then you add an Eric Gordon. I think that's going to be crucial. I mean, you have to give up Gary Harris to Orlando, but I think Denver, for what they want to do, they understand that, the window in the West for them is open. If LeBron is compromised, if Anthony Davis is compromised in any way, it's wide open. Is anybody really believing in the Jazz to go to the NBA Finals? Probably not. Denver was right there. They were on the cusp, and I think they're going to be that team alongside the Clippers who looks at the Lakers and says, hey, if that team is not at full strength, we need to take advantage, and we got to take them out and get to the NBA Finals, because I harp back to what Jimmy Butler said in the bubble. The problem at the end of the day, the test is LeBron James. That's who you have to beat. That's who you have to take out if you want to go ahead and win a championship. And as you mentioned earlier, we just can't bet against LeBron James. You just can't. At the end of the day, if he is healthy and that team is there, they're going to be a favorite. It's going to be a hard time picking against the Lakers in the West. But I have to think if either of them go into the postseason and are not where we think they should be in terms of health, the West is open, and I think teams like the Clippers and especially teams like the Nuggets, knowing they were knocking at the door last season, this is their chance to get to the NBA Finals and go from there. I mean, the Brooklyn Nets may be waiting for you, but still, this is your chance. And if you're a team like the Denver Nuggets, I think you've made some great moves and kind of building that team and making sure that it's strong enough to make a deep run.
Yeah, and my loser would be Markelle Fultz. Because the only guy left.
Yep.
Everybody else got a first-round pick. Evan Fournier get 2 seconds back. They didn't even get a first-round pick for him. They're like, screw it, we'll still trade him. Nothing for Markelle Fultz.
Yeah, my biggest loser is going to have to be Orlando if they don't get Cade Cunningham. If they do all this and they don't get that first overall pick, then it's all.
How about Houston and Minnesota? They're worse than Orlando.
That's my thinking. So this fire sale, like they're thinking that they are going to bottom out and they will catch up to Houston and Minnesota at some point. But if you don't get Cade Cunningham, all of these moves to me are inconsequential. But, they tried it. I mean, they had this core for a few years. It didn't work. And sometimes you just got to blow it up. And I'd also say the biggest loser is Terrence Ross. I mean, think about this. He's been on Twitter the past couple of days and just giving us gem after gem. He's now the oldest player on the team. And I think Terrence Ross might not even be 30 yet. So when you think about what he's had to endure and just Orlando, God, those days of Shaquille O'Neal and Penny and that trip to the finals where Olajuwon and them swept him and Shaq just never gets over the fact that, Dream got him. Orlando, just a long ways away from that. And it feels even a long ways away from Dwight Howard and going to the finals back in, 2010? Or I don't know what Orlando's doing. Hopefully they get Cade Cunningham. But Chris, you're right. If Houston or Minnesota ends up with that first overall pick, then Orlando, it's just kind of like purgatory for the next couple of years.
Well, they were kind of in NBA purgatory where they were always like the 8 or the 7 seed that had to play against Cleveland and Boston.
Yes.
Now they're in purgatory where they're not bad enough to get the first overall pick. They are in, in the draft lottery era, they're in where the Knicks have been for the last how many years. They were never bad enough to get the first overall pick, but they were never good enough to make a playoff run at the deadline. And that's where Orlando will be next year, assuming they don't get the first overall pick.
Man, I mean, that's the time. The trade deadline really shows you who's a buyer, who's a seller, who's trying to make moves, get their way up to the top, and who's content with kind of just, calling it a season and getting themselves and securing potentially a top 5 pick in the next NBA draft. Whew, I mean, it's a lot of baseball talk to start the midnight hour. But Chris, I mean, we're going to have to bring in somebody to kind of give us more. We need more of a perspective. And that's what Robin Lundberg will give us in a few moments. He will join Chris and I. He will talk all things NBA. We'll get into the Knicks. We'll get into the Nets. We will get into the trade deadline, go a bit deeper, and we'll talk about both coaches here in New York, Steve Nash, Tom Thibodeau. Who has a better case for Coach of the Year? Host of Sports Illustrated, radio host 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on CBS Sports Radio. Robin Lundberg will answer all of those questions and more. Stick around. One-on-one. We'll be back in just a moment.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back. This is New York's longest running sports call-in show. This is One on One. I am Andrew Posadas alongside Chris Hennessy, and it's my pleasure to bring in our next guest. It's time to talk some hoops, a lot to get into. A senior host at Sports Illustrated on the radio Saturday mornings from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on CBS Sports Radio. He's also the host of Full Court on Flatbush, a Brooklyn Nets podcast from the New York Post, alongside former NBA player Kerry Kittles. Robin Lundberg. Robin, welcome to the program. Appreciate you coming on and joining us.
You got it. No problem. What's going on?
Not much. I want to get into the Brooklyn Nets first because James Harden, he made a statement the other night after the Brooklyn Nets win where he flat out said, I am the MVP. And when we think about this MVP race right now, Robin, there are so many names and so many players jockeying for position, Jokic, Embiid, LeBron, Damian Lillard. But for someone like James Harden, how much validity do you think there is in the momentum James Harden is currently getting in the MVP race? And do you think it's realistic that he could win it, given that, you know, he hasn't played with KD and Kyrie much this season?
Well, I mean, I think he is the MVP right now. LeBron would have LeBron's my default MVP almost every single season. There are a couple of years in there I would have given it to somebody else. But LeBron's value is going to be on display right here with the stretch where he's out. But at some point, he misses too many games. And I think that's the problem with his injury if he's out for weeks in what was already a close race. Nikola Jokic has a hell of a case. He's been awesome this year. He leads the Nuggets in basically every statistical category. But if you look at the word value and take James Harden, the Rockets lost 20 games in a row. I know people don't like the way he left Houston. No, I haven't seen one person go, I like the way James Harden left Houston. But they lost 20 games in a row, 22 out of 23. Meanwhile, he goes to Brooklyn, and I didn't think anybody on that team could be the MVP because you had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. But the circumstances are what they are. And what felt like a luxury has become a necessity. And you look at the sample since he got to Brooklyn, I think there's something like 24-7 with him in the lineup. I might be off by a game or two, but it's right there. They've won 17 of 19 or 18 of 20 games he's played in. All but one of those has come without Kevin Durant. A handful of those have come without Kyrie Irving. And you take into account just the numbers he's putting up: 26 points a game, 8 boards, 11 and a half assists, leading the league in assists. And what you see in front of you watching them play, I don't know how you see one team go like this, another team go like this, and just specifically the level he's played at, where I think he's been the best player in the NBA since he got to Brooklyn, and he doesn't have an MVP case. I mean, at that point, you're just being petty and kind of holding what happened in Houston against him as some sort of disqualifying event where his case is really strong.
Yeah, this week, of course, was the trade deadline, and the Nets didn't do anything on deadline day, but we've seen Blake Griffin's Brooklyn career get a little bit of a start here. What have you seen from Blake Griffin so far, and how will he be valuable to this team on a championship run?
Yeah, I think, well, look, the Nets have a certain level of identity where they tend to play small most of the game. They've still been starting with DeAndre Jordan, but Nick Claxton has been playing really, really well for them, and he gives them some defensive versatility. And I think Blake can play the 4, but can play the small ball 5, and he's been moving well defensively. He's been getting into positions, taking charges, and all that. And clearly, we've already seen he dunked on his first basket. He caught a lob from Harden last night. He still has some of that balance. I mean, I think he was injured. He was in basically NBA purgatory, and now he's revitalized. The one thing I think, so he'll give him some scoring punch off the bench. They've been playing through him off the bench. But the one thing I think that I wasn't quite accounting for, and I've seen the last couple games, he plays with a certain level of a certain attitude, where he's feisty, which could be annoying, could get under other teams. Dwight Howard's been an agitator for the teams he's been on in recent years, the Lakers last year, the Sixers this year. I could see Blake Griffin bringing that sort of role to the Nets as well as what he can do as an individual talent. And it's not exactly something they had. They didn't have that kind of guy who likes to mix it up and maybe he's going to really rub the other team the wrong way. So I think in addition to the skill set that Blake provides, that's a role he might have on the team too.
And Robin, when I think about the Nets and the term scary hours, that's really what's been coined by James Harden. And for this team, when they are at 100%, do you see anybody in the NBA that has a chance to beat them in a 7-game series?
The Lakers would be the only team I'd say, could, because they could put Anthony Davis at the 5, and then I'll never doubt LeBron James. Never going to do it. But I think LeBron's injury is a pretty big deal. I think, AD's injury, obviously a pretty big deal. And we have to see those guys get back out there and back out there healthy. And even if they are healthy, I'm when you say chance, I don't know if they're the favorite in that series. I think that the Nets should be the favorites to win the championship this year, based on talent, the level of those 3 players that have been put together, based on depth. It's not just those 3 guys on that team. You got other players who are of value. Once you brought Griffin in, since Claxton has emerged, Joe Harris, Jeff Green, it's not just those guys. And then the circumstances that have transpired elsewhere with LeBron and AD both going out. I think the Nets are the clear and definitive NBA title favorites right now.
I want to get a little bit more into the Lakers because we obviously mentioned the 2 injuries. They don't make a trade at the deadline necessarily, but it looks like they're going to go out and get Andre Drummond. Their recent struggles have been pretty well outlined, but how do you think he's going to fit and maybe kind of hold serve at least until LeBron and AD come back? Well,
look, they've Marcus Gasol has not been great for them this year. I mean, he can still pass the ball, still does something, but he's past his prime, just is what it is. And last year in the playoffs, Dwight Howard really helped them in specific matchups. He helped them against Jokic. You're going to need a body against Jokic for that matchup. Otherwise, their starting center position was JaVale McGee for much of last year. And in fact, they didn't reach their pinnacle until he was sort of moved out of the rotation. So I do think Drummond can help them in giving them that replacement in the starting lineup, giving them that matchup specific guy. But I do think the Lakers at their best, it's still going to be when Anthony Davis is playing center. I think that's when they're at their most dangerous. The question is just how healthy they're going to be and when that will come to fruition, because that's their most versatility, that spreads the floor the most for them. So I think Drummond is somebody who, there's a little groupthink against him right now as if he's a terrible player. I don't think that's the case at all. So I think he's a piece of value, but at the same time, he's not he's not shifting the dynamics of the league via his addition.
Yeah, and for the Lakers, depending on, when exactly LeBron and AD do come back at full strength, I mean, the Lakers right now, they're in 4th place. They could find themselves in the back half of these 8 seeds. They could be 5, they could be 6, 7th. So, Robin, in your opinion, does it really matter where the Lakers end up as long as LeBron and AD are 100% heading into the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, it does a little bit. 7, you have to play yourself into the playoffs. I mean, that's different than just being there, right? Yeah. I mean, if LeBron and AD are healthy, then I don't see them losing to any of these play-in teams. But it's another thing. It's another matchup in the first round. Well, it also matters where they're seeded for, let's say Utah or Phoenix or one of these teams at the top in the Clippers, because if you catch the Lakers in the first round, that changes the dynamics of the playoffs a little bit, right? Depending where they're at. And if from the Lakers side of things, it's one more series that is a little bit more difficult. Ultimately, it all does come down to their health. I mean, that's the main thing. 100%. Are they 100? If those 2 guys are 100% healthy, they're still the favorites in the West. But there are a lot of good teams in the West, and these aren't little injuries. These aren't things that are day-to-day kind of thing. These are significant injuries that not only are you out a period of time, but I like to have a period of time for a guy to ramp up once they get back, to get comfortable, to get to 100%. And that's where I think my biggest concern for them is not even just whether they're healed, but whether they have to be thrown right into the fire and don't get that time to adjust and adapt their games and are playing in meaningful playoff games right off the bat, where they don't have the time to have a week or 2 to get their legs under them.
So we just came back past the trade deadline. I'm curious what you think the most influential trade is going to be. When we look back and the championship is decided, what are we going to say? That was the the trade that impacted the season's outcome the most?
None of them.
Okay.
I don't think any of them are gonna. I like the ones that I like a lot. I like Norm Powell to Portland. Trent could score, but he's not the kind of guy that was going to ever excel next to Dame and CJ. I think Norm can be that kind of guy who can really play well often. So I think Portland got better. I like the Evan Fournier pickup for Boston. It's another guy who can create for himself. I think an underrated player. The Vucevic move to Chicago is not impacting the title picture. I didn't know how they were going to make that team better. So I like that move for them making the team better. I don't know if there was, I guess of all the moves that the biggest one from actually a championship contender status that happened on deadline day is Rondo. That's probably the one, however that winds up, that will have the biggest sway. Rondo's such an interesting player because he's a net negative almost all the time at this point in his career, just like a bad player. But he does have that playoff thing, and I'm not going to doubt it anymore after last year in the bubble and the way he played for the Lakers. And the Clippers desperately needed, I thought they needed somebody who can get downhill. That's not exactly him, but they did need somebody to get the ball moving a little bit more for them, to steady the ship for them. They were bad in clutch situations, and maybe a leader in a sense. Like Kawhi Leonard's a great player, but he's never been that leader. Even back in Toronto, that was cool, Kyle Lowry. So of all the moves that happened on deadline day, if you're going to tell me which one could have the biggest sway on the championship aspect of it, I guess I would say Rondo, because if it really works out for them, the Clippers are already on that cusp. But I'm interested to see how that's going to work out.
Here talking with Robin Lundberg. Robin, I do want to get your thoughts on the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks, they really stood pat at the trade deadline. A contingency of fans were clamoring that they'd make a big splash. But when you consider the fact that this team is really playing with house money, essentially, everything has worked out and exceeded, I think, the expectations of those from around the league on what they thought the Knicks would be this season. When you just think about that, are you surprised that the Knicks decided to just stay with what they have and go with that into a potential postseason berth?
No. And you also have to remember, just because they're not made at deadline doesn't mean moves aren't made. The Knicks traded for Derrick Rose, right? Just like the Nets got Blake Griffin off these things happen. They just happened a few weeks earlier. What were the Knicks going to do? The Knicks are not in a position. I don't think they should have been mortgaging any of their pieces that they like for a stopgap kind of guy, or even this. It's different from a buyout standpoint, but the Drummond talk, I don't know how much he fits their timeline. I think the Knicks, you said house money. I think that's about right. The Knicks have, if you had told me the Knicks would have the record they have now before the season, I would have thought you were crazy. So they deserve a lot of credit. Julius Randle, has played like a legit all-star, not like a fringe all-star, like a legit all-star. And I was not a big fan of his game last year. So that's a huge thing for that franchise. I think Emmanuel quickly coming through in the draft and looking like a viable piece is a huge thing for that franchise, especially because of the Toppin pick not looking so good. If that quickly pick hadn't come through, that would have been rough. RJ Barrett developing and improving has helped. So I think that, the Knicks are still a ways away talent-wise from being in any real conversations, but they have exceeded any reasonable expectation, and they play hard all the time. And Thibodeau has that team, like that game against Washington the other night. I don't think, the Knicks in the past win a game like that. And that's kind of been the difference in their season, is winning games like that, beating the teams that are on their level or below, and not being, giving up on games. And I've been impressed by the Knicks. Now you're going to want to keep building. I don't think, you want to go on that progression and see where it takes you. Obviously, if a free agent winds up or a superstar player becomes available and you have the means to make that deal, go for it. But I don't think the Knicks really had the pieces to pull off anything crazy on the trade market, and therefore making a move to make a move doesn't make sense to me.
My question's about Obi Toppin, because we're Fordham guys. We saw him in the A-10 last year as the best player in college basketball and was going to be a number one seed if the tournament happens with Dayton. Now he's struggled pretty mightily, actually. So do you see a potential for obviously there's a potential for growth, but I guess my question is, do you see him going more the RJ Barrett route where, yeah, he struggled early, but he got better, and now he's one of the better players on the team, or a Frank Ntilikina, Kevin Knox route where every time they put him out there, it just feels like they're wasting time?
I think it's concerning. I'll never write off somebody this early in their career. That's not fair. But the difference between RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin is, what was RJ Barrett, 19 years old, 18 years, something, and Obi Toppin's 23. And his game isn't exactly as NBA, modern NBA friendly either. I mean, Barrett, you needed him to improve his jump shot, and it looks like he is improving, especially from three a little bit, but he was always going to be like a dribble drive guy from the outside, maybe draw the defense, kick it, that kind of thing. Toppin is more of a big, but what does he do well? Like, I mean, you're not going to post him up, right? Defensively, he looks like there's going to be issues there. As far as offense, he passes the ball all right, but he's not beating anybody off the dribble. He's not a top level shooter. He looks kind of lost out there. I think it's concerning right now, where he's been at, and considering he should have been an already developed player coming in. Because usually you don't stick around in college that long if you're a surefire prospect, right? And the case for him would have been, all right, he's already ready. He's got that level of athleticism, throw him into the fire. The fact that he doesn't look ready where he's at, it's not the end. It's not, I wouldn't write him off, but I haven't quite seen the skill set or the reasons to think, it's going to go in the right direction. And that's why I think you have to be happy that the Quickly pick turned out, because your perception would be a little different if those were reversed, if they actually picked Quickly where they picked Toppin, and you'd go, he's working out. And then who cares? This is where he was later in the draft. You win some, you lose some. I think it's where he was drafted. And considering that like Halliburton came later, that is going to make that stand out a bit more.
And before we get you out of here, Robin, I want to get your opinion on something that I thought about leading into our show the night before, and that's Coach of the Year. And there's so many candidates when you think about Quinn Snyder, Monty Williams in the West, but I also think that both Tom Thibodeau and Steve Nash should be in the conversation. But in your opinion, who do you think has the stronger case to win Coach of the Year, Steve Nash or Coach Tibbs?
That's a good question. It's a good question. Steve Nash has done a great job. I love Steve Nash. I love his demeanor and everything about him. And he's dealt with, some stuff this season. But ultimately, if you were going to make the case that James Harden is the MVP, then am I also going to make the case that Steve Nash is the Coach of the Year? And Kyrie Irving's also had an excellent season. I know he hasn't played every game, but he's been there for the majority of the season. KD's been out for the majority of the season. So I think I would go with Thibodeau because, again, I didn't see this Knicks team coming at all. I thought they would be one of the worst teams in the league, to be quite clear. And they're much better than that. They're middle class right now, right? Like they're I don't think anybody takes them, seriously come to the playoffs or anything like that, but they're a tough out on any given night, and they play tough, they play hard, they've exceeded expectation, they've developed some players in the process. So between the development we've seen from Randall and from Quickly as a rookie, and the level of play we've seen and Barrett developing, the level of play we've seen from the Knicks, I think it's Tibbs.
There you go. There you have it, folks. He is a senior host, Sports Illustrated. You can catch him on CBS Sports Radio Saturday mornings from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Also the host of Full Court on Flatbush, Brooklyn Nets podcast for the New York Post alongside former Net Kerry Kittles. He is Robin Lundberg. Robin, appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us here on One on One.
You got it, guys. Have a good one.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
One-on-one, welcome back, Andrew Posadas, Chris Hennessy, and now my pleasure to welcome back Kayla Wentzel for a second round of headlines. Kayla, take it away.
Hello, guys. Entering our final hour here. So exciting. We've made it through a great show. It's been so much fun so far. So we're going to talk a little bit about the NHL and a little drama that occurred in one of their games. So during a Red Wings Predator game, NHL referee Tim Peel had an open mic, and he was heard to be saying that he wanted to call a foul on the Predators early, but acknowledged that the foul really wasn't all that much, among other things. And so Peel has officiated 1,343 regular season games. So he's notorious in the NHL. He's one of their, favorite NHL officiates, even if they don't really like him all that much. But he was now fired for his comments. So Chris, I know that you're a big hockey fan. Are you surprised by this incident? I mean, I feel like referees use makeup calls or call things intentionally a lot, but are you surprised by this in any way?
Yeah, well, no. And I think that's what's the most upsetting, because you look at the penalty, it's a tripping call. It's not roughing, it's not a fight, it's not a illegal hit, it's tripping. It's either a trip or it's not. And if it's not tripping, then don't call the penalty. I can see a control the game type of call coming out in a legal hit, a borderline legal hit, a coach mouthing off to a ref, a player mouthing off to a ref. I can see a call controlling the game in that situation. But when you're looking at a tripping call and the ref is admitting, obviously not that he didn't know he was admitting, but admitting that it wasn't that much of a trip. Like, what are we doing? Like, call the game. Like, it's not hard. Like it's hard, but it's not. Look, I as you said, Kayla, I do love hockey, and it really sucks when this is the hockey story. We had the melting ice in Lake Tahoe a couple months ago. We had the Artemi Panarin situation, which was not Artemi Panarin's fault at all, and it wasn't really that much of a bad look on the league. It was just that's what was in the news, and they couldn't get away from it. And now it's this. And he was, who knows what the actual punishment was, but he's not he was retiring on April 24th was going to be his last game, and this happened just before March 24th. So probably he was suspended for a month, and they said, it's just leave. You're done. So now for the last couple of days, there's been video of the refs taking their hand and holding it over the mic to make sure that it's off. There's been calls in the late parts of games that maybe you wouldn't see before. I don't know. It's concerning because to me, it's not Tim Donaghy, but it's not good either. It doesn't feel like the game is legit right now. I don't know.
Yeah. If we're playing the game, something, nothing, or everything, this is absolutely everything, because there's an unwritten, in sports, there are unwritten rules. And one of those are makeup calls. We see it in every sport, basketball, football, and soccer, and in hockey, where, if there's a bogus call on one end, the refs understand that. They hear the crowd, booing. They hear the players complaining. So at some point, they're going to try and make it square and give the team, a foul call down the line. But that's something that isn't publicly known. That's something that's behind closed doors. I think that's a fundamental understanding between officials, off the field, off the ice, off the court. But the moment that you publicly, blatantly say that you are giving a makeup call to another team, that's where there's milk and egg all over the face of the NHL, where now they have admitted one of their officials, somebody who's been there for years. And Chris, you can attest to this, his final game, April 24th, he would have been able to choose wherever he wanted to go to kind of get his ceremony and be have that, proper farewell. He could have picked any game to officiate, and it would have been, a send off, just as you'd see a lot of experienced officials get in North American sports. But this is something now where, he's been banned. So he'll never officiate another NHL game for as long as he lives, even if he wanted to stick around. And it's an awful look for the NHL. And if you're, leagues like the NFL, the NBA, you're just looking back and you're just hoping, Major League Baseball, you're just hoping that this doesn't happen to you, because when fans and outside people, media, everyone else, when they hear something like this, it just confirms, Kayla, what everyone knows in sports. And it's that you will get makeup calls. They do exist. Nobody talks about it. No, it's almost like Fight Club. The first rule is don't talk about Fight Club. Makeup calls exist, but the first rule is don't talk about makeup calls actually existing.
Yeah, I think. Go for it, Kevin.
I feel kind of differently about it. I don't feel like it's that big of a deal. I don't know, because we all know that makeup calls exist. Like, just because he got caught saying it, I don't know why. I don't know. This is the probably unpopular opinion, the hot take, but I don't know necessarily why it was such a big deal. We know makeup calls exist, and we know the referees talk about them when their mics are off. So I know that because he got caught, it looks bad and the NHL integrity of the game. But I kind of feel like officiating and like flaws in officiating is part of the integrity of the game. I don't know, baseball has talked about automated strikes and ball calls and stuff like that. And I think that kind of takes away from the game. You expect bad calls and you expect makeup calls, and they are part of your experience in watching.
You're actually in hockey circles, at least on the majority side there, Kayla. A lot of people are saying that this is not that big of a deal. I just disagree, because where does it stop? That I don't know. Yeah, makeup calls are a part of it, but this wasn't even a makeup call. I feel this is like a trying to control the flow of the game type of call, which I feel shouldn't happen unless it's aggressive. You know what I mean? Like if there's an open ice hit, right, and it's kind of near the head, but you're not really sure, and Nashville is starting to get a little bit rowdy, then you call that elbowing or whatever. You got send the guy to the box 2 minutes, you send the message. It's tripping. And he admitted that John Merrill, the Red Wings defenseman, embellished the tripping. That Victor Arvidsson didn't really actually trip him, and he could have called tripping an embellishment. I think that this is a bigger deal than a lot of people are making it out to be, because especially look at what sport it is. All those other leagues can kind of with official, because it's not that big of the NFL is the most popular sport in the world, or in the country, not in the world, of course. The NBA has shaken off what is the biggest ref scandal in North American sports history. That was a long time ago now.
Yeah.
And the MLB has the least qualified person in North American sports working as one of their most tenured umpires, and Angel Hernandez. And they're able to shake it off. Now, this is the only story in the NHL right now about how an experienced official is talking about making controlling the game via their penalty calls. And I don't know it. And if you watch games, they're officiated differently in the playoffs than they are in the regular season. Sometimes they're officiated differently in the final 5 minutes of games than the first 55 of the games. 55 minutes a lot of the time. It's a problem. I don't really get it. I'm an advocate for an eye of the sky ref in the NHL. I think it will lessen injuries because there'll be less people on the ice. You can kind of see everything. It's not good. It really, I don't like when the NHL has bad publicity because it just feels like it's harder for them to bounce back from than everybody else.
No, and just to build on that, when you think about it, the NHL is still trying to establish itself and to gain a larger fan base. They get the deal with ESPN Plus. They'll be in more homes. And for a league like that, I think about them or the MLS or the WNBA, leagues like that, we're still trying to, build the fan bases that we see baseball, the NFL and the NBA have. Something like this, for the casual fan, they could easily dismiss the NHL and criticize the credibility and say, well, if that ref said it on a hot mic, how many other refs in the NHL are giving calls or controlling, dictating the pace of game with a penalty that probably wasn't justified in calling. So I think that really gives the league a black eye in terms of now it's, it was inherently assumed that makeup calls and stuff like this exist, but now you've heard it right from an official's mouth that it is there. And that was his intention, to go ahead and give a call in order to control, the flow of the game. But I think all three of us are in the sports media world. And if there's anything we've learned, nothing good comes from a hot mic. If you're an official, if you're a player, if you're a host on the media side, it's just, you have to make sure if you are going to potentially expose the sport or expose an unwritten rule, you cannot allow that to go public. And now I think the NHL, while I'm sure it might be something that we forget about in a few months, it's still something now currently in the next few weeks that I'm sure Commissioner Bettman will be looking to kind of, sweep away under the rug as quickly as possible.
Oh, yeah. You can bet that those refs are going to be tightly monitored on their mics now. I mean, that is certainly going to come from this. I don't know. Yeah, I just kind of feel a little more like cavalier about it. I don't feel like that it was that big of a deal. And I recognize it was wrong. And so no one should control the game flow for something, as little as a trip that was like embellished by the players. But players in every sport embellish an injury or embellish a supposed foul so that they can get the call. And so I just feel like the NHL did the right thing. They fired him. They addressed it. They said that they didn't want their integrity of their game to be tarnished. And so I recognize that as a league that does not have that much popularity, that as a league that is a little lower than NBA, NFL, MLB, that this is going to be hard for them to bounce back from. I also kind of feel like it won't be that hard for them to bounce back from, because I just feel like everyone who watches the sport understands this. And I'm sure that a similar situation has happened in other leagues and in other sports. And so to me, it's like, why should this ruin their whole reputation? I don't know that it does, because I think that we've seen it. We've watched it. We know how this works. We know how it plays out with referees. I don't know. I just feel like it won't actually ruin their reputation as the NHL.
I hope you're right. Kayla, because I don't know. It doesn't, like, you talk about an NBA situation set similar to this, and then the next story is look at what the Brooklyn Nets did last night. Look at the Lakers did last night. Talk about an NHL situation like this, and then you just switch sports. Like, and I'm not hating on our rundown. That's what we're about to do too. Like that's how it works. That's how the sports media scape makes its money by not talking about hockey, except for when it's a big deal. And when every time it's a big deal, it's a bad thing, which is now this is 4, 5 times in a row.
Yeah.
Not good.
That's a good point, Chris.
Certainly not what you want. So yeah, Kayla, what else you got for us headlines wise?
I know. Now I feel bad switching.
No, it's okay. I'm not making
Chris just called me out.
It's a tough transition. I mean, I'm being put in a precarious situation just trying to segue it.
Like this is an important story as well. And I think I can make the same point on this story. We're talking about the men's and women's basketball tournaments. When you talk about the women's basketball tournament, it's something negative, and then you switch to the men's tournament. I can make the same argument.
No, definitely not the publicity that you want. And I'm sure, again, the NHL, the women's basketball tournament, they're looking to get away from this. They want to be in the news for the right reasons. But Kayla, give us more on what we're seeing in the disparity between the men's and women's basketball tournaments.
No, right. Like you had said, Chris, we're going to talk about something bad about the women's basketball, and then we're going to move on to talking about the NCAA men's basketball tournament. But the disparities and the discrepancies just continue to grow between the men's and women's tournaments. The NCAA released their 2018-2019 season budget this week. And as expected, I think, the men's tournament received $28 million in funding, and the women's tournament received half that, about $14.5 million. But the men's tournament brought in $864 million, whereas the women's tournament lost $2.8 million. So, I mean, we had talked about the discrepancies between their facilities last week. We know that the women did not receive a good weight room, not enough food, not great merchandise. And so, Andrew, they have yet to release the 2021 budget this year. But, I mean, do you really expect that anything's going to be different?
Absolutely not. I mean, right here on my phone, this is the page for the NCAA on Title IX and quote unquote gender equity. And the first sentence says, quote, one of the NCAA's principles of conduct for intercollegiate athletics focuses on gender equity. Well, how can you really be focused on gender equity when the men are getting almost $14 million more put into their tournament than the women are? I mean, this is hypocrisy at the highest level. You've created something in Title IX to prohibit stuff like this from happening, but the people who are allowing this are the people who wrote Title IX into existence. It just, to me, it doesn't make any sense. We knew immediately when we found out that the NCAA men's tournament was going to be in Indianapolis. I think it was like a month and some change later before we found out that the women would be in San Antonio. And then we're looking at the facilities, and some of these games are being played in almost rec center type gyms. And when you compare that to the men who are playing in Bloomington, they're playing at Hinkle, they're playing at Mackey over on the campus of Purdue. These are beautiful arenas, Division I level, and it's not the same. We're not seeing the same for the women. And it just really is a shame at the end of the day, because I truly believe if you put women's basketball games, if you put tournament games on TBS, on TNT, on True TV, on CBS, in between with the men, you are going to draw great ratings. People think, Chris, that women's basketball isn't a draw. If you go to Europe and a lot of places over there, Italy, Russia, the women's basketball players are renowned. They're thought of just like NBA players are thought of here in the States. So I'm not shocked. I'm not surprised. And when we see the budget numbers for 2021, they're going to be more the same, especially what we saw to start in the first round of those tournaments. Obviously, the NCAA was able to adjust and upgrade those facilities, but only because they were called out on it. If they weren't called out on it, they would have waited until the Sweet 16 with less teams and then unveiled all that stuff. So to me, it really is, it's hypocrisy. And at this point, I think the NCAA, whenever the day comes where the NCAA is forced to dissolve and we pay players and we go about a different way when it comes to collegiate athletics, whenever that day comes, I will be much happier, because right now at this point, I mean, what are you really playing for if you're not getting the respect that you deserve?
Yeah, I think it's well said, Andrew. On all accounts, I come from an interesting part in this place because I am from one of the only state in the union where the women's basketball team is as big of a deal as the men's basketball team. UConn women's basketball is the best team in this state has ever had, and they are a big, big deal here. But when Kemba led the team to the national championship, when Shabazz Napier led the team to the national championship, they were a bigger deal. But some of the biggest, athletic memories I have are the Maya Moore team breaking the record of consecutive wins, Brianna Stewart going 4 rings in 4 years. Those kind of athletic achievements in the history of Connecticut sports are huge, huge. And having a player like Brianna Stewart here for 4 years drew a lot of people to that gym. And I've seen firsthand how a really good team, a really good product can draw people regardless if it's women's basketball or men's basketball. But in order for that to happen, they need to be the greatest team of all time, right? Because the UConn women's basketball team is the greatest team of all time. And that's what it takes to draw the people to the games. In South Carolina, in Baylor, they're not drawing it. They're not as big of a deal as the men's teams because it's been a much shorter span that they've been this great. Yeah, it's upsetting and it's hypocrisy, and you said it well, Andrew. I don't really have too much more to add besides, it's interesting. I think, I don't really know what else to say.
Yeah, I think that you speak to kind of, Chris, like the whole thing, which is like women have to work twice as hard to get to like an equal level playing field that the men are. And so the same with the UConn women, they have to be the best in order to get that kind of ratings. And any team that isn't the best, any women's team that isn't the best is probably not going to get that much credit. Whereas a men's team that isn't the best will still be covered more. And like, I see this just even, look at the difference in budget from 2018. So I think that for starters, that shows that this problem was not isolated to this year and they said COVID communication like screwed up their facilities and their resources. This problem was not isolated to this year. They have been underfunding the women's tournament for years. And so I think that contributes to the fact that the women don't draw in as much revenue as the men, because when you put more money into an organization and then you give them better resources, better access to media, better sponsorship deals, they will draw in more money. Whereas if you give the women less money to not be shown on television, to not have major media deals, obviously they're not going to draw in as much revenue as your men team. Like, I think that is expected, but I'm sure that the NCAA will say, well, the women don't make as much money, so they can't get as much money. But it's a cycle, and that the women don't make as much money because the NCAA doesn't give them enough money to give them enough sponsorships and resources so that they can make enough money. So I think that it's a very toxic cycle, but I think that UConn is kind of like a prototype to show that women's basketball can be incredibly popular if you funnel resources and give them the media time that they deserve.
Absolutely.
And Chris, I would say this. You mentioned UConn's women's basketball, and it's crazy because I think they're the only program, whether it be collegiate or professional, that is a detriment to their long-term success. Has the NFL, have their ratings been affected by the New England Patriots going 20, 25 years plus, being a contender, winning, 6 Super Bowls? Were Michael Jordan and those Bulls teams in the 90s, were they castigated or criticized? Were people not watching them win 6 championships in the 90s? The Lakers, when they won 3 straight with Kobe and Shaq, the Yankees of the 90s, the ratings were still through the roof with people, not only fans of those teams, but fans who wanted to see those teams lose. So there was ratings either way. But I feel like in women's sports, particularly, the great teams like UConn, they almost get penalized. Like, you guys are supposed to dominate through everyone. Like, we're not watching you guys win a 4th straight national championship because according to them, there's no parity, there's no competition, but it really is unfair and unjust. If that's the case, be consistent and judge other teams harshly or put them on that pedestal. But to only do that for women's teams, it really just goes to show you we have such a long way to go in giving women's sports and just giving them their respect and give them equal platform, equal footing alongside their male counterparts.
I think that what you have to look at, too, is in a normal year, where do the women play the round of 64 and 32, and where do the men? I think if you look into that, that's because if I'm remembering correctly, they just play them in the college gyms.
Yes.
Of the home team.
That's it.
Yeah.
The men, they play at the XL Center here in Connecticut. They play at the Garden. Is usually 16s and 8s, but they play at big arenas. They don't play at college gyms.
Yeah, and that's all part of the budgeting. They don't give them enough money so that they could even rent the stadiums. I'm not sure how it entirely works, but the women couldn't even afford probably to get one of the biggest arenas because they don't have enough money to allow them to.
Yep.
Yeah, here's the deal. If the NCAA, if they lose any money and they try and send, they try to get some sort of empathy, sympathy from anybody, you can miss me with that. I won't feel bad for the NCAA if they lose billions of dollars, because at the end of the day, it's a nonprofit organization, but they seem to be profiting off the efforts, the blood, sweat, and tears of student athletes around the country. We will leave it at that. Kayla is going to stick around for the rest of the show, leading you in to 2 a.m., our final hour here. We're going to move over to the Diamond. The baseball season is coming sooner rather than later. And the Yankees and Mets, huge expectations for both teams, but some big questions entering the season for both respective teams. Chris, Kayla, and I will discuss those questions and give some potential answers. Keep it locked. One-on-one. We'll be back.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
New York's longest running sports call-in show continues on, our final hour, leading you up to 2 a.m. here on WFUV 90.7 FM. Andrew Posadas, Chris Hennessy, Kayla Wentzel is sticking around because, guys, we've waited long enough. The winter is past. The weather's getting nicer. I'm walking my dog without a North Face on in the morning these days, which is always good for me because I hate walking in 25-degree weather. My German Shepherd Husky dog absolutely enjoys it. But with the spring comes Major League Baseball season, our final weekend without regular season games. And for the Yankees and for the Mets, two teams who come into this season with huge aspirations, championship expectations at that. We know the Yankees have been touted as the best team in the American League, and a team for the third, fourth year in a row is seen as the prohibitive favorite to get to the World Series. And then for the New York Mets, since Uncle Stevie came in and cleaned house and has kind of changed the identity of the franchise, everybody is buying New York Mets stock. They are the bee's knees. The honey of the town, if you will. Everyone is locked in on them making a deep run in the postseason. So many questions yet to be answered. Let's start with the Yankees, Chris. And I think one question for me in particular goes to this starting rotation and everyone outside of Garrett Cole, because you can kind of pencil Garrett Cole in. He's going to get double-digit wins. He's going to be top 5 in ERA if he's healthy. He's going to be that workhorse. But what about the rotation after that? When you think about guys like Kluber, Tyone coming back from injury, what are they going to be? They've shown flashes throughout spring training that they might be showing form again. You think about Jordan Montgomery, Domingo Germán coming back. Davy Garcia's been sent down, so that's locked in Germán in the rotation. But Chris, aside from Garrett Cole, there's still a lot of uncertainties and unknowns with the rest of this starting staff.
Yeah, for sure. And now that you put Garcia down, you hope that he can get back to where he was in the regular season last year, and pitch when this team needs him, because there'll be injuries and they'll need him to come out and win a game. He had a great stopgap performance in Buffalo last year against the Blue Jays. That really helped them get into the playoffs, because that wasn't always a guarantee. But from the starting rotation, I think you're just hoping for solid seasons from Kluber and Tyone. Hope that Montgomery can kind of get back to that pre-Tommy John. Montgomery, he was pretty good before he had that surgery. And I don't know what to expect from Domingo Germán. It's obviously been over a year since he's pitched. He had off-the-field incidents that took him away from the team for a season and a half. And now he's back. It seemed like at the beginning, kind of to the chagrin of his fellow players, which was interesting. But he's welcomed back onto the team, and he's now made the opening day roster with a little under a week to go. So I think it's a huge question mark, and I think you have to hope that when Luis Severino comes back, he is healthy and he's able to slot in at number 2. I think that's the big part for me, is if Severino, if you can get to a spot where you're top 2 in the AL East with this rotation, then you're able to slot Severino in, and he's 2017 Luis Severino. Then you have a really solid rotation. That's 2 big ifs, though.
Yeah, I think that the Yankees rotation is interesting because most of them are coming off of an injury. Most of them did not really pitch that much last year. And so I think that that's especially concerning. But even the ones who did pitch last year, the 2020 shortened season, the average team pitched 516 innings last year, but in a normal season, they pitched 1,500 innings. And so I think that there's a big question of depth, if any of the pitchers can work their way back up in order to sustain a full long 5, 6, 7 innings if they even could. And I think that especially with Tyone, he's only been limited to 2 innings, I think, in spring training. That's not a lot. And I know that they're obviously trying to ease him back into it. They don't want to overwork his arm. They don't want to cause any other injuries. But I think there's a huge question of like longevity and depth of how long can these guys really pitch? Like, I'm just not sure that all of them have the capacity and the stamina to go for more than 3.5 innings.
Yeah, I didn't mention Severino initially because he won't be back until at some point this summer. But I think that's crucial when he does come back, because what is this rotation when he makes his debut? Does he have to come in and be the second ace there? Does he have to be 2017 Severino? Is there going to be pressure on him to be what he was before the injury? And I think it also is going to speak volumes to maybe the state of this team. I mean, there's no doubt that injuries have played a huge factor the last couple of seasons. So when you have guys like Kluber and Tyone, Montgomery, guys who've been injured before, who could potentially be hampered at some point and have to spend time on the IL, that's only going to put a strain on your bullpen. And this is, quality arms, but if they have to do more and pitch more innings than they have to, Chapman, Loizica, Zach Britton, Chad Green, if those guys are asked to step up and do more because there are injuries on this staff, then I think for Luis Severino, you kind of can't, you can't just bring him in easily. You're going to have to throw him into the fire and say, hey, we need someone opposite Garrett Cole to give us wins, and to keep us right there because, as good as the Yankees are, I mean, they may run away with the AL East, but the Toronto Blue Jays are a really good team. You don't want to sleep on them. So for the Yankees, you're going to have to shore up at least those those first 2 or 3 spots. They have to be surefire quality starting pitchers there. I mean, you got Garrett Cole. You're hoping it's Severino. If Corey Kluber can kind of regain his form, then you have it. Then you're good. But for this rotation, Chris, I mean, a lot's going to be on their plate. And if injuries rear their ugly head, then we could be seeing the same old story that's really just hindered the Yankees from making that trip back to the World Series.
Yeah, for sure. And I do have a bit of breaking. Do you have a breaking news song you want to sing us, Andrew?
Dun, 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 dun.
Luke Voigt out until maybe the first 3 weeks of the season. 3 weeks no baseball activity due to a partial meniscus tear. And he went surgery.
And it's begun. The injuries have begun.
And they announced, they're going to keep Jay Bruce now, and Jay Bruce will probably move on over and be the first baseman. But that's what I'm saying. It's injury. That's what it's been the last couple of years. This team just can't stay healthy. And I know that's out of their control, but at the end of the day, then you're going to have to rethink your core. If your core guys are consistently getting hurt, and as my friend Jimmy Sullivan says, the best ability is availability. Dang it, Jimmy, I messed that up. I'm sorry. I should have done better. The best ability, availability. There you go. But regardless, I think, and we're talking about the Yankees too, I think another question for them that to me, if the Yankees don't get to the World Series, if they come short and they don't win it all this upcoming year, what's the status of some of their young core members when you think about guys like Aaron Judge, Gleyber Torres, Gary Sanchez, Voigt, who we just mentioned, now injured, Gio Urshela? They're going to be free agents soon. Arbitration periods are going to come up. And if the Yankees can't get it done this year, and they've had, swings with this core group, Kayla, at some point, if the Yankees can't get it done this year and they can't win the World Series, is the future of this young core, do you expect all of them to come back if they can't get it done?
I don't expect all of them to come back. I don't think that they will. Why would you keep this team? You've had this core for a long time now. I mean, it's not just like 1 year and done. You've had this core for a couple of years, right? And so I think that it might be time for the Yankees to do a full swipe, a clean slate, and build themselves back. I don't know. I feel like they've been out of the running for a little while now. What was it, 10 years maybe since they've won a playoffs or something?
Yeah, this is season number 12 since.
Well, 2009 is such a long time ago. Good
right?
Lord.
So I think that you have to rebuild. I think that you have to look at what you have, look at how far it's been, how far you fell from your glory in 2009 and work on fixing that. And I think that maybe that will come from getting rid of some of these main guys that you've stuck by, but that haven't really produced for you.
I think 2 people will be gone if this season goes down the toilet like the last 4 have. Gary Sanchez will be gone. There was conversation about him leaving after this past season. I am the conductor of the anti-Gary Sanchez train. We finally got almost everybody in FUV besides Nick DeLuca onto the anti-Gary Sanchez train. Even got Emmanuel on there, which I didn't think I was ever going to. That's how bad his season was. And I'm done with Gary Sanchez defenders. He can't hit for contact if his life depended on it. He's the worst defensive catcher, I don't know, ever. And he needs to go pronto. So if he has another bad season, he's gone. The other guy is Aaron Boone. Ever since Joe Girardi was fired, they have not gotten back to the position Joe Girardi brought them to. A team that had no business being in the playoffs, a team with all of these players on it, except for Garrett Cole and DJ LeMahieu, the 2 best players in the team. Brought them to Game 7 of the ALCS, which they had not gotten to under Aaron Boone. So if they do not get to the World Series this year, Gary Sanchez is gone and Aaron Boone is gone.
Yeah, I'd have to tend to agree with Gary Sanchez. At this point, this is his final stand with the Yankees. If he can't do anything this season, he's definitely gone. I think the Yankees are probably going to key in on Aaron Judge and Gleyber Torres. Those are the two guys you want to keep. Those are your cornerstones. And I'd have a hard time, thinking that the Yankees are going to part ways with either of them. And I think Gio Urshela is the kind of guy, he might not come at a premium. You could probably get him for a good price. He's solid there in the corner. I think Luke Voigt's another guy who we might not see. I mean, was last year an aberration, leading the league in home runs? Is that something he can build on? If he's injured and hampered throughout and he doesn't have that season to build on, maybe the Yankees aren't sold on him, as their first baseman moving forward. But for the Yankees, a lot of problems that you want to have if you're Aaron Boone. You want to have all this talent and need to know where to shift them and move them and how to make it work. So for Aaron Boone, a crucial year for an American League that really is the Yankees versus everyone at this point. And that leads me to transition to the other New York team, that being the New York Mets in the National League. And in the last few months, has anyone gotten as much momentum in Las Vegas in terms of potentially winning it all and making bettors happy than the New York Mets? I mean, they're right up there. I believe they're tied for second in the odds behind the Dodgers to win the National League. They're projected, I believe Las Vegas Insider has them winning 91 games. So they're expected to be a 90-plus win team. And Kayla, I think it's all well and dandy. I want Mets fans to be happy. They deserve it. I grew up, I lived in Queens. I understand being a Yankees fan in Queens, how much Mets fans, when they went to the World Series against the Royals, everyone was talking, this is a Mets town now. It's a Mets town now. But oh, how the mighty have fallen. And they came back to square one. Steve Cohen comes in, tries to change everything. They're going to spend now. They started, added some pieces, but now the pressure's on. And for the Mets now, if they can't kind of at least meet those expectations, maybe not exceed them, but if they can't meet the standard that I think a lot of the baseball world is expecting from them, then it's going to be absolutely disappointing, because right now the momentum is in the Mets fans' favors. I can't blame them for being excited about this season.
I know. I'm afraid that they're going to get a little heartbroken, though. I think that you have to kind of be cautiously optimistic about this team. Yeah, they've been really flashy in the offseason, and look at all their big moves and look at their big money that they have now. And while all that is well and good, and it was very exciting to watch, and I'm sure as a Met fan, it's probably even more exciting. It's probably something that you have dreamed of, you've looked forward to forever. But I don't want to say that the Mets are going to be the best. I don't know that I would have put them right underneath the Dodgers. I'm not sure that I have that high of expectations for them. I think that we still have to recognize that it's a new team. It's still rebuilding. It isn't. Didn't Steve Cohen say 3 to 5 years? I think it could take 3 years. I don't think that this team is going to immediately come together. They've all just come together from offseason. They're going to gel and then they're going to be perfect. I think that that is asking too much. I think that we have to allow room for error. And I think that in this first year, there will be some error. I think that they're going to have a little bit of kind of trials and tribulations trying to figure it all out. And I'm not saying that they're not going to be good. I think they're going to be a contender, but I also think that the National League East is a really hard division right now. So I don't want to say that I think the Mets are right there, right with the Dodgers, because I don't think that they have that experience yet to be there.
I agree with you 100%, Kayla. I don't think they're better than the Braves. I don't think they're better than the Dodgers, and I don't think they're better than San Diego either. The Mets, yeah, they traded for Francisco Lindor, which is great. He isn't under contract for next season yet, but it doesn't matter yet. Excuse me. I think when you look at their free agency, it was ultimately a failure, right? Because they went after 4 guys and didn't get any of the 4 guys. They got James McCann as opposed to JT Realmuto, which cover yours, Kayla. I think it's perfectly fine, honestly. Sorry. But they went after Trevor Bauer, got trolled epically by him and didn't get him. I also personally think that's fine, but clearly the front office wanted him because they realized their starting rotation isn't that good right now. They went after George Springer because they realized Brandon Nimmo is a net negative offensively for this team, and they didn't get him. He went to Toronto. And DJ LeMahieu stayed with the Yankees. So, I don't know. It's I don't see it. I think there's a lot of problems pitching-wise, starting and relief, for this team outside of Jacob deGrom. Right? You have Jacob deGrom was the best pitcher in the world. Fine. Carlos Carrasco is hurt. You have no idea what you're getting from Marcus Stroman. Noah Syndergaard is hurt. David Peterson is not that good. Seth Lugo is very good in the bullpen. You have no idea what you're getting from Edwin Diaz. Dellin Betances looks old and creaky. Jared Familia is old and creaky. There's a lot of questions pitching-wise with this team. I personally don't see them beating the Braves in the NL East. I can see them getting 90-plus wins. I can see them getting into the wild card and winning the wild card and getting to the division series. I don't see them beating the Braves, the Dodgers, or the Padres.
Yeah. When you think about it, considering what they've been able to do, you get Lindor, Carrasco, McCann. They've gone from Jeff Wilpon, who is like the Cherry Valley, right nearby Fordham University. They've gone from that to Steve Cohen, who is really he's Whole Foods, Trader Joe's in Manhattan. He's got everything you need, always stocked and ready to go. And I think Mets fans, that's something that very much has to excite you and make you feel like, hey, this could be the year where we get back to the World Series once again, and this time cash in and get a trophy. But Chris, you mentioned the bullpen, and I think the last couple of seasons, that's been the biggest question for this team. Can they close games? When it comes down to the 6th, 7th, 8th inning, I think Mets fans understood it was almost like that predictability that you knew at some point the bullpen was going to cough up the lead, and this was going to be a heartbreaking loss come 9th inning, with the Mets having a chance to either tie or take the lead and then end up losing because their bullpen cannot hold the lead. So I think that's something that's going to be it's going to be incumbent on guys like DeGrom to maybe go 7-8 innings if they can to kind of at least ensure that the bullpen doesn't have enough outs to potentially screw things up like we've seen be the case the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it relies on the right arm of Edwin Diaz, to be perfectly honest. If he's able to have even 3/4 of the season he had in Seattle before they traded for him, it'll be better than what he's given them for the past 2 years.
I think it's funny, Chris, that you called it a failure of an offseason, because I feel like every time I've been on a discussion on one-on-one, everyone has said, yeah, they did really well this offseason and that they got a lot of key pieces.
What did they do in free agency? Everybody they went after, they got outpaid for. So your new owner with his deep pockets got outpaid by the Dodgers, the Phillies, and the Yankees. Come on now. What are we doing? If you're the New York Mets, those are the 3 teams you need to beat. Atlanta would be the 4th. The Dodgers, the Phillies, and the Yankees outpaid the New York Mets for 3 free agents that they wanted. Simple as that. I don't know. The Lindor trade is great, and he's going to be fantastic for this team. But George Springer would look really good in orange and blue.
Yeah. Rightly so. But I think now that the Mets have that money to spend, that wasn't the case with the Wilpons. They knew they were limited every single offseason.
Doesn't matter, though, Andrew. It doesn't matter if they're not on the team.
No, that is true. You got to make the moves, and we'll see what the Mets do. That's going to be on them. And again, the season starts April 1st. The Yankees will host the Blue Jays. The Mets will go to D.C. and play the Nationals. Both teams, I mean, it's exciting. Both teams have an opportunity to go far, but still a lot left to go. A lot of questions left for them to answer if they're going to end up playing for a World Series title. Let's leave it there. Got about 22 minutes left to go in the program here on One-on-One. We are going to close the show with some Sweet 16 matchups, previewing what you are going to expect, what you'll see come Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening. Chris, Kayla, and I will preview the second half of the Sweet 16 matchups right here. This is One-on-One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
One-on-one. And you know what? I think I'll order some March Madness because March has not ended yet. The college basketball tournament still continues on the men's side. Sunday sees 8 teams vying for 4 spots in the Elite Eight, and we will be seeing matchups in the West and East region. It all starts with Gonzaga, the overall number 1 seed. They will play the 5-seeded Creighton. And again, our producer, Alex Walls, believes he is guaranteed Creighton will beat Gonzaga. And hopefully, for my bracket's sake, that does not happen. That starts at 2:10. Then in the East region, the number 1 seed, Michigan, the Wolverines, they will play the Seminoles, Florida State, the 4 seed, 5 o'clock. Then from there, the 11 seed UCLA. How about the Pac-12 and what they've been able to do? They will play the 2-seeded Alabama Crimson Tide at 7:15, and to end Sunday night, 9:45. I just mentioned the Pac-12, 2 Pac-12 teams in the West region, 6-seeded USC and the number 7-seeded Oregon Ducks. A lot of good things. So let's get right to it. Chris, what matchup are you most excited for today, Sunday?
Creighton and the Zags. I think you look at Gonzaga's season, and this is a really stereotypical thing to say about Gonzaga, but they played nobody. They had 80-something strength of schedule. Their strength of schedule was in the 80s, I should say. Excuse me. The one team they played was BYU, who was a 6 seed that got bounced in the first round against UCLA. They were losing at halftime in the West Coast Conference championship game there. And this is their first real big test against Creighton, who's a really good team. We saw them in the Big East this year, and they're a really solid team. I think that's going to be an interesting matchup. But the best matchup on the card, based off the 2 teams, is Michigan, Florida State. Florida State is a team that can go win the national championship. Michigan, the lone Big Ten team remaining. I picked a bracket fully based on believing in the Big Ten, and the team I eeny, meeny, miny, mowed to the championship game, or to the national championship, I should say, is the only one still alive. So I'll consider myself lucky on that one that I didn't pick Iowa. But it's going to be a fun day. Yesterday was a fun day, or we haven't seen the games yet. I'm just assuming it was a fun day. Well, inside for you. Today will be a good one too.
Yeah, I think I'm most looking forward to Oregon versus USC. I think that game, well, for starters, I like it because just on a purely back 6-7 seed, I like that matchup already. I just think that's a fun pairing because it really could go either way. I personally think. I think that game is going to be the one that is closest. And it's also the only rematch this year. They are the only team that has actually seen each other, and they've already played each other in the regular season. So, and that time USC won, USC won. And so I think that kind of makes for an interesting storyline, a rematch. And so I personally want to see how the Ducks fare against USC. USC plays a much more patient game, I think. And so I think that is going to be interesting to watch how the dynamic works versus the Ducks.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go Florida State and Michigan only because for Leonard Hamilton, now when you think about that 2019 tournament, they go to the Sweet 16, lose to the Zags. They're a top 5 team in the country last year. The pandemic cancels the tournament, so they don't get a chance to potentially go to the Final Four. And now against the Michigan team that I think a lot of people believe maybe the weakest one seed remaining, and without Livers, one of their better scorers. I mean, kudos to Juwan Howard and what he's been able to do there. But certainly this is not a team at full strength. And for Florida State, with the athletes that they have, and MJ Walker and a potential lottery pick in Scotty Barnes, I think for Florida State, now is the time for Leonard Hamilton, if he's going to make his way into the Final Four and vie for that elusive national title that he's been looking for. And a lot of people respect the heck out of Leonard Hamilton and what he's been able to do. I think if they can get past Michigan, they'll be right there. The journey is still going to be tough, but if they can get past Michigan and get to the Final Four, this is a Florida State team with their athleticism, the way they can play defense. I think they provide, as long as Barnes and MJ Walker can be the driving force on offense, they're a problem for any team in the rest of the field. But I'd have to think that. And Chris, I'd only pick that too because you have Michigan and I need you to lose. So it's only right that I pick against you, but I still love you though.
I expect nothing less. But yeah, I think that bracket, honestly, that East region is the most exciting one left. The Midwest is just a bombshell. I mean, it's going to be fun because it's Loyola Chicago against Oregon State. That already happened, obviously, and Syracuse against Houston. But as we're looking towards Sunday's games, you have the 1, the 2, and the 4 still in the East, and 11 seed UCLA. It's looked really, really good. They beat Michigan State pretty handily. They beat BYU pretty handily, and they killed North Texas. It wasn't even close. So I think that's the most interesting region left, and certainly the most interesting region on Sunday. And if the national champion isn't Gonzaga, I can see it being 3 of the teams from the East. Really.
No, for sure. Michigan, Florida State, Alabama, all 3 could potentially cut the nets down. And that's the thing. I think that's what motivates Florida State. They know if they win out, they're going to see Gonzaga in the semifinal, in the national semifinal. So I think for them, if they're using that as bulletin board material, I could see this finally being the year for Leonard Hamilton to break through and make an appearance in the Final Four. I do want to go back to that Gonzaga-Creighton matchup, though, just because if Gonzaga can get through Creighton, then they'll get the winner of Oregon and USC. And I think those 2 teams pose different problems. For Oregon, that's a team with Duarte and the guards they have there, Richardson. Those are guys that can light it up, and they're going to want to make it an up and down, first to 95 wins. That's going to be the style that I think Oregon's going to try and do. And then for USC, they have the Mobley brothers and they have size. And I think they're going to want to, attack Timmy, get him into foul trouble. So for Gonzaga, Kayla, I think these next 2 games, I mean, if they get past Creighton, which is not a guarantee at this point with what we've seen in this tournament, but for Gonzaga, just to get to the Final Four, they're going to play a really good team in Creighton. And I think either Oregon or USC has the potential to upset the Zags if they're not playing at 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's the year of the underdog. And so while I technically have Gonzaga winning my bracket, I also recognize that is not necessarily, they don't have an easy walk to get there whatsoever. I mean, these teams are going to be challenging. And I think that Creighton for them will pose a real threat just because they are so well known for their 3-point shooting. And so I think that they could really make the Zags miserable kind of on the perimeter. And so I think that while I don't personally have Creighton winning, I wouldn't actually be upset because I do love to see the underdog come. And I know that Alex Walls loves Creighton, and so he wants them to win. But I mean, it won't be an easy walk at all, but I don't think it's going to be easy for any team to get to the national championship. I mean, in all of the different divisions, I don't think that, or different regions, I don't think that any of them, once they get through this one, will have a piece of cake and it'll be something so easy. And I think that's just the joy of it in NCAA and March Madness. Everyone brings their best. Well, most of the time they all bring their best because they all want it so much. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you look at Oregon, when you look at Gonzaga's path, and you look at Oregon and how they're able to neutralize, they weren't really able to neutralize Luka Garza, but they're basically able to outscore him. And you're looking at a USC team and a Gonzaga team that relies on some bigs. And if they're able to kind of use that formula where it's look, if we can just defend him like twice, we can score on every single possession, which is basically what they did against Iowa. I think if you tell any Iowa fan or any college basketball fan, Garza is going to score 20 and Iowa's going to score 80 in the round of 32. Like, lock it up. They're winning the game. They didn't. They lost by 15. So, or 10 or 15. So I think you look at Oregon as a team that matches up with both USC and Gonzaga, and they're able to play fast and to score a lot of points. You don't just score 95 points against a 2-seed in March Madness. Awful luck.
And I would say this, though, at the end of the day, if all of these teams are playing at their best, I still believe Gonzaga is far and away the best team in college basketball. When they want to be and they're locked in, I don't see anybody that can beat them. I think a lot of people wanted to see them play Baylor. That game was canceled because of COVID. If we get that game, a lot of people think that Davion Mitchell, Maceo, those guards there can pose problems for Jalen Suggs and Nebhard, and Ayayi as well. To me, it's going to be tough. It's all on Gonzaga. I think the only team that can beat the Zags are themselves. That's it. If they have an off night, like we saw from the Illini, like we unfortunately saw from Ohio State and from Texas, RIP to a part of my bracket. But if they have that kind of letdown, and they're allowing these underdogs to get more and more, gain more confidence throughout 40 minutes that they can hang around and potentially win, I think that is the only downfall I can see for Gonzaga. But if everyone is firing on all cylinders, this is a team that should still steamroll through everyone else. It's just a matter of what we're seeing in such a volatile and unpredictable college basketball season. That may not end up being the case, but I mean, my money would still have to be with the Zags at the end of the day. I mean, not literally, but metaphorically speaking, if I had to put everything down and give a Charles Barkley guarantee, I'm going to put it on the Zags. But anything can happen, and at this point, I would expect chaos because I think March Madness brings that, and that's what's manifested, Kayla. So who knows what's going to happen, but still some exciting matchups and a chance for some teams, some Cinderellas to continue forward in their march to the Final Four.
Yeah, I like UCLA versus Alabama too. We haven't really talked about them all that much. And they're tomorrow night, and I like UCLA. I know Bama's on a roll. They've won 8 in a row. It's probably unreasonable, but I don't know. UCLA is coming back. They started out in those first 4 games. They fought their way to be here. I like their momentum. I think that they just have a good power behind them right now. And so I wouldn't put it past them to take down Alabama.
Yeah, I think if Alabama shoots the way they did against Maryland, they're unbeatable because they made like every single shot. But if they can't, then they are very beatable. I think that is a method of play that can lead to an upset. And you saw it. Maryland played a pretty good game and got killed because Alabama scored like 90 points. But if they're not able to shoot the 3 like they did the other night, UCLA can beat them absolutely.
Yeah, Chris, you make a valid point there, and I think UCLA is the popular pick for an upset in these matchups just because they can shoot the 3. I mean, we talk about Alabama and what they can do from the perimeter. Well, UCLA, they have Juzang, they have Bernard, they have Jaquez, Tyga, their point guard, Tyga Campbell is also there too. So they have guys who can knock down shots. And I think they're a team that can keep up with the scoring pace that Alabama wants to set. And if they can keep up and if they can stick around and this game goes into the 70s or the 80s, it's going to be all about who makes clutch 3s down the stretch, who can make more. And I think UCLA, they're showing the propensity with guys like Juzang. I mean, they're cold, man. These guys are cold-blooded. They're knocking down shots. They're not scared of anybody. I think the Pac-12 came into this tournament really feeling disrespected. People thinking that this was a league that didn't deserve as many teams as they got, that a lot of people thought what happened to the Big Ten with, 8 of 9 teams being bounced early. A lot of people thought the Pac-12 would go through something like that. So for UCLA, they're not your ideal Cinderella as an 11 seed. This is a program that's won more national championships than I think I can count right now with 5 minutes left in the program. But UCLA, if they can keep up that pace, shooting the ball, and guys like Juzang and Jaquez continue to contribute, the pressure is going to be on guys like Petty, Herb Jones, because at the end of the day, when you're the favorite, the pressure falls on you to follow through and win that game. For a team like UCLA, Chris, they have nothing to lose. And it's a big reason why that mindset has gotten them to the Sweet 16.
And I think when you look at the Pac-12, they've already knocked out 2 Player of the Year candidates in Luka Garza and Cade Cunningham. Proven that they can beat anybody at this point, right? Iowa's gone down and Oklahoma State's gone down. And Tennessee in the first round to Oregon State, and there's many others that I can't remember off the top of my head that they have beaten, and they really didn't have a 2. They don't have a 2 or a 3 seed. You know, it's an 8, it's an 11, a 6, a 7, and a 12 that are in the Sweet 16. And the Big Ten had 2 1s, a 2 1s, and 2 2s, and only one of them made it to the Sweet 16. It's what was the best division in basketball all year long, and the Big Ten, has been taken over by the Pac-12. And what did Bill Walton call them? The Conference of Champions, I believe.
Conference of Champions. Was that good, Kayla? Was that a good impression?
I think that was perfect. I thought that was spot on. No, but I think that the Pac-12 are definitely underrated. And we talked about a little bit last week, the Big Ten and the Big 12 coming in, and everyone always hypes up those conferences, and everyone always hypes up the Big Ten. Everyone thinks that's the best one in the whole country, but I don't know. It's kind of shown us a little bit this time that maybe it's not. Maybe we need to stop putting so much stock in the Big Ten, and we need to start appreciating other different conferences like the Pac-12.
Yeah, I'd also say this with, as I mentioned, all the unpredictability and not knowing what to expect from this year's tournament. There is one constant that sticks around year by year, and that's that one-man band teams like an Oklahoma State, like an Iowa with a Garza, with a Cade Cunningham. They do not beat collective team efforts. Good teams that know how to play together and have that rapport, they will beat one-man bands every single time. I don't even, and I think you mentioned UConn, Kemba Walker, Shabazz Napier. That might be the last time a single player lifted a team to a championship. I think about Carmelo Anthony way back when with Syracuse. It's just something that doesn't happen often, Chris. And we're seeing it again. Collective team efforts will beat a one-star team just about every single time come March Madness.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And it has been a long time since we've seen a team like that. And I mean, you think about this is a little bit of an unfair remembrance of the undefeated Kentucky team, but they didn't win the national championship, and they had the best player in Anthony Davis, and they had some other great players too. They were undefeated, but that's certainly an example that comes right to mind.
Again, a lot to figure out. 8 spots. Are there 8 roses remain for 8 lucky teams? We'll see who punches their ticket into the Elite 8 and into the Final Four moving forward. But that seems like that's about it. I'm looking at the clock, not too much time left. That means that one-on-one, this 3-hour voyage that we've given you, take off your seatbelt, get ready. You're at your destination. A special thanks to our guest tonight, Robin Lundberg. Of course, you can catch him Saturday mornings on CBS Sports Radio from 6 to 10. Also the senior host at Sports Illustrated. All of our clips, highlights can be seen on all of our social media platforms, YouTube, and of course, Facebook. The sports director of WFUV is Bobby Shaffardini. Our producer is the magnificent Alex Walls. Kayla Wentzel had our headlines. For Chris Hennessy, I am Andrew Posadas telling you, enjoy the weekend, continue enjoying sports, and until next time, One on One is a production of WFUV Sports. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, everyone.